Right, this is going to be episode 45 of OverSight. Could probably do some sort of shit reference to the 45 caliber and a pistol and some sort of tired old cowboy who didn't update himself to the modern day, couldn't fight with new weapons, and ironically should have relied upon DPS largely. Whatever, that was all just impromptu, it wasn't bad. So anyway, we'll get into this episode. So we'll do the thing again where I remember to introduce people before the show starts. So me and Monty, the people that you all live rent free in our heads by discussing us obsessively all the time about everything we've ever said, bringing up everything we ever said that you didn't like, and explaining why you really don't like or are interested in us while discussing us and watching our content. So welcome. Your usual seats reserved. And you have to realise the dollars all look the same in the account. You can't tell which ones are from the lovers. You can't tell which ones are from the morons. So I don't worry about pussy. I just dive in that shit like Scrooge McDuck. So me and Monty, usual host and co-host. And although what I do enjoy, Monty, is you can tell I'm not really in Overwatch enough because I always thought, right, I'll tell you a quick analogy. Right, once Travis Gafford, one of the most well-known journalists from League of Legends, gave me an analogy that actually did really explain to me how I think Riot Games saw me in League of Legends, which was his analogy went like this. In the early days, when there was barely anyone doing any journalism, because like League of Legends esports wasn't very big at the time, Riot used to think he was annoying, right? Because he'd always be there, like hanging around the events, trying to get interviews, like trying to ask them for stuff. So they were like, oh, this guy's fucking annoying, isn't it? But then I showed up, and then they were like, holy fucking, I guess Travis is all right, actually, get him. And then here's the kicker though. He said that just when Riot was thinking like, do we have to do something about this Thorin guy? Then Richard Lewis showed up and they were like, you know what? Actually, we'll tolerate the Thorin guy, but like aim all phasers and missiles against the Richard Lewis creature. We must destroy this. Like that basically is the analogy. So my problem is, Monty, I almost feel bad because the good thing about Summoning Insight when we did that show is I was such a colossal asshole. It made you seem classy in comparison. Like League of Legends fans actually naively think you were like super professional or something. Like they forget that you actually did also flame people, call back a Merrill motherfucker, like all that good shit. But in contrast, that didn't seem that bad. There was no like career-ending scandals from saying shit like that. So I haven't done my job in that sense. Basically, I haven't been the flak to draw the missiles away from you so you could successfully shoot down the Russian pilots.
Oh, I mean, can you do that, or do you think it's just going to alienate you further because there is no Richard Lewis to come in?
That is true. That is true. There isn't, is there? I mean, at this point in time,
convince him to join the party too, but
that might be hard. That might be a tough sell for all parties involved in that one. Sadly, well, sadly, that I have always said that is the real problem with the whole Reddit scenario still being a bit fucked in Overwatch. It's like you can't really incentivize anyone to get into the game unless they're just super into the game. Which I know an idiot's just going to go, we should only want people who are super in the game. Like, you don't know what the content scenes are like in every other game then, mate. Like, most people in the industry don't even watch the fucking game that they work in. Like, you know how many staff members, fucking people who are high up at companies don't watch the match? Like, they go to the esports event and they go to a conference that's in a room that's like off in an expo alley, and they come back after the who won the tournament? It's like, they don't know what the fuck's going on. So, like, anyone who thinks that, like, this industry runs on passion, that was some shit we all just mind-fucked ourselves with when we were getting paid like $200 a week. Like, no, it actually runs on cold, hard sales and the fucking naive dreams of plebs on Reddit who actually think this is like going to validate their dog shit attempt at a personality. Anyway, enough of that. See, Flem, I'm helping you out now, mate. I'm doing the same thing here. Right, there we go. Now, here's the only thing I will say. It's going to look really bad, Flem, that the episode starts. There's a really weird cut. And then you get introduced all of a sudden. Like, Flem didn't have any sort of a meltdown there. We didn't have to delete something. He wasn't just cursing at Monty or anything, It's all nice and civil. So, okay, our guest for this episode is Flem, who is general manager, right, of the Houston Outlaws.
Yes, sir.
Title, yes. There we go. Avast, what do you actually do now apart from not play for the Boston Uprising? I don't know, mate. What do you do?
I never, I'm glad that you introed with that. No, I'm a Contenders caster. I'm the duo with ZP and Contenders right now. And then obviously,
there you go.
I've taken over, in a lot of ways, I've assimilated Sideshow's stream. And now we do the coverage where everyone that doesn't want to be in Overwatch League chat is in my chat.
Like, I'm not hating.
He is the Remora on the side of the Overwatch League shark.
Exactly. I'm sort of just the feeder there.
Like, I'm not even grandstanding there, mate. I don't watch Contenders. Like, I can't watch 20 teams playing Overwatch League. So, yeah.
Don't worry. I don't blame you because that's a criticism that can apply to 99% of the populace. So
That's true. That's true. Right. Here's what we're going to do. At the outset of the show, we'll just state for people who aren't aware, right? Flem has been on our show before. We do actually know him. I know this is one of the problems with how people view like drama on the internet is in most cases, they nearly always magnify it way more than it actually is like interpersonal drama. Like even when people bicker on Twitter, it's never usually that extreme. But unfortunately, everyone does want it to be like days of their lives or something. Like, oh my God, Flame said that about me. Oh my God. That piece of shit, you've got to get him back. This time, we've got to make Dallas feel good. Well, fucking hell, I'm not a miracle. Anyway, you know what I mean? Like they want like drama on that level, whereas really, if anything, we're going to have the same discussion in a more nuanced manner while all making our points. And hopefully without anyone making any sort of allusions to anyone dressing in any clothing that is not of their particular sex and gender. That's just the ground rule I'm going to set at the outset, you know, just to protect everyone. To protect everyone. You never know. Maybe it's me, Flem. Maybe I'm the one who's going to pop off. I don't know. Who knows, right? So
live your life.
Listen, I've tried to. That's my problem. Right. So let's start the episode. Obviously, we should just start with all the fucking meat here. So I have to say, Avast, in similar fashion to the intro, I actually don't know why you're here. Like, Monty just told me you're on the show as well. Now, what I don't know about this is, though, right, is surely the context is because you were on the stream with Flame as well, right?
Yes, correct. I was the medium with which Flame came on and put on some various.
I ranted,
and then there's a lot of clips out there of me sleeping in my bed as Flame talks.
Okay,
for
there we go.
45 minutes straight.
I made Avast a lot of money.
I have to say, this is why Flame is always welcome on the stream because he made me a lot of money that night. He made me a lot of money. I didn't even say words. I literally sat there and laughed for 45 minutes.
People paid him.
And people paid me. So. That's really the context of the discussion there is that I gave Flame his medium, to really put his thoughts out into the world.
See, there were only he just went and found the largest megaphone for his anger, which was available at the time, which was weirdly your stream.
Yes, it's weird actually because
it's because ZP's there. ZP will always drag more out. Yeah. ZP will always engage. If you ever have something to complain about, ZP will always be there to
literally always engage. Like the
either
funny
make
part
it
was,
worse or try to.
I actually agreed with you, Flame, in a lot of points, but you're so bad.
I'm very scatterbrained. I get very what's the word? I think scatterbrained is just the best.
Like what you're doing now?
Yeah, kind of. It's literally just scatterbrained. It's like I have a thought and then it'll evolve, and as it evolves, it starts contradicting the original thought I had, and then I wind up in a circle.
A lot of branches there.
It's a big tree of mess.
Here's the thing, okay? What we'll do is we'll organically recreate the same argument, right? By asking Monty this question. So Monty, this team called the Houston Outlaws, right, that has clearly put a lot of stock in roster building into their DPS core and many different versatile options therewith, was playing against the undefeated Vancouver Titans, the best team in the Overwatch League. And if you watched the first couple of maps, you might have thought to yourself, why don't they ever run those DPS comps? Because this whole 3-3 business isn't really working out for them with the way they're getting their, I believe the technical term is mother-loving shit pushed in on Paris. So after watching that, I thought similar to you and the other casters, maybe they'll switch it up a bit. We were wrong. Now, what is your argument? Like, I know you did a video on this topic, but what's like a concise version of why was this a bone of contention for you? And then we'll get into the counters, etc.
So I will say that, like, when I was talking on the stream, the Outlaws were part of a broader conversation that I was talking about, which is that teams need to find their own style in general, which is just what I was talking about in this. I was talking about it using the context of this match, but I wasn't just talking about the Outlaws, even on the broadcast itself. And I think that is like the fundamental issue is like, I don't believe that even though we can have, I think it also got confused because I'm not sure what was going on with like a lot of the Outlaws players or like why they I couldn't tell if they were getting feedback from people that was wrong or whether they were just creating straw men to fight on Twitter in terms of saying that people seem to have this opinion that GOATS wasn't the best strategy, which it objectively is. And that was never anything that I said anything against. And I did say on the broadcast as well that, you know, they had to win 2 maps if they wanted to take a victory in the series, because I don't think it's even remotely possible to run anything that's not GOATS on Rialto in particular, which was the 4th map. So I thought that the Outlaws' best chance was to do something on either, probably Eichenwald was the map that I was talking about mostly, but they had to win, you know, Paris or Eichenwald as well in order to get to that map 5 and I think have a better chance of winning. But it was part of a broader conversation that I think we can have on this show about, and obviously it plays into a very difficult metagame right now where GOATS is really dominant and nobody's asserting otherwise, about like what teams should be doing, because in general, and we can talk about esports history with this as well, in general, I've also been disappointed by the lack of creativity from many professional teams, or what I perceive as an attempt to find their own styles.
Oh, there's a lot we can go into with that. But
yeah, there's a lot.
We'll set that up. There. We'll tease that. You know, I mean, a lot of noobs watching the show.
So anyway, what ended up happening was I said some stuff on broadcast. I actually I didn't know at the time what was being said at halftime, and obviously, like, I'm literally casting the match, so I can't look at Twitter and see like other people tweeting things and shit like that. So I think it spiraled out of control really fast, and it sort of jumped off from my points, which I think were, in my opinion, my points were reasonable.
Interesting review of your own points. Fair enough. Okay.
Reasonable. I don't, and I think it like escalated super fast through other vectors that I was not in control over. And then I don't also know what was happening to the players or the team, like on social media at the time, if people were like going nuts at them or like there was stuff that was being exacerbated. I still don't know that. So,
okay.
Like, my perspective is not the most valuable one here, because like I was one part of like the swirling like maelstrom of shit that I couldn't see was happening while it was happening. So like I'd like to hear from Flem like what his sequence of events was there.
I mean, I think that there's like a general consensus, or I don't want to say consensus, but when it comes to like broadcasts, it always feels from like an Outlaws perspective that the casters like want to find a reason why we're sucking even if we aren't sucking. And so like from that match, going into that match, I think everyone felt pretty good actually. Like, I mean, we had spent 2 weeks prepping, almost 3 weeks actually, because we had a week off. So we like had tried DPS comps on like every map. We had like that unique Torbjorn strat on
yeah, that's cool.
What's it called, on Busan, which owns, and like we ran our DPS comp on Busan, and like we were very like well aware of like how DPS comps function and like when they're good, why they're good, etc., etc. And then I think at the end of the match, everyone was feeling pretty good. Like, I mean, you lose to Titans, you kind of expect to lose to Titans. You think you can beat Titans, but you don't expect to win. And that match felt winnable at multiple stages.
Which is why I said afterwards, like the only reason why people were frustrated was because it was winnable.
Well, yeah, but I think that the takeaway from our perspective was that the best thing people could take, like the best thing that the casting crew or the desk combination could take away from that match was that we should have tried a different comp, when I think the only reason that match was even close to winnable was because we tried to mirror GOATS. And that was kind of like our plan from the beginning, was like we had watched the Soul match, specifically on Eichenwald actually, where Soul actually made that map very close. Running GOATS, and we felt like Soul's GOATS was actually pretty weak comparatively to like what we thought would have been necessary to have beaten Vancouver. And so our general takeaway from that match was just like, I mean, Bumper hit a couple 5-man shatters and there's really nothing you can do about that, but Eichenwald would have been winnable. And then how much of that, like if we had won Eichenwald with Moomin not, like if we just didn't get 5-man shattered twice and we just won Eichenwald, what the conversation would have been is like Outlaws, GOATS, fantastic, etc. And so it felt like very...
Right, you know, everyone just let him ride on this one. We're going to let him make all his points, then we're going to pick them almostly apart. So
I just mean like the conversation drifted away from like how well Outlaws played to why aren't they playing DPS? And from like our perspective, it was like, what? Like, how is that the biggest takeaway from this match? And then our Twitters got overloaded with like, I guess, the analysts and the fans just spamming, you guys would have won if you had played DPS comps, and it's just like, where did this come from? And then when it comes from broadcast, it's like, okay, broadcast is actually fueling this fire that shouldn't exist. Like, we didn't really have...
Okay.
Well, I mean, that was the perspective, I guess.
Right, there's basically 4 central points here. One is what actually happened in the match and what everyone in the call agrees was the correct analysis of it, which obviously we don't have to have any consensus on. People can all give their own thoughts. We'll do that first. Then there's the angle of this part of whether or not people, like the narrative of the series would have changed based on who won in the context of what they did actually play. That's the second one. Third one is like why people got triggered on Twitter. That's like a separate one. We'll do that towards the end. And then the fourth one is this angle of like fans and how the broadcast interacts with them. So let's do the first one first. So, right, Avast, come on, you haven't spoken yet. What do you think on this topic? What's your thoughts on what, did they play the optimal comps for how the match went? Do you think they could have done better with a different comp? What's your take on it?
I mean, I think I have, despite the fact that I was, essentially memeing Flame when he was on that stream a while ago when he came in to do his points where I was just laughing. I think that as someone that has an ex-professional background and, and I watch it also right now, myself and CP watch an obscene amount of Overwatch. We literally are covering not only Overwatch League, but we're casting NA Contenders and we're casting Korean Contenders. And every single day, it's like, it's an obscene. So I'm watching and I'm consuming so much Overwatch content. I'm consuming so much GOATs and GOATs variations played on top of the professional background that I look at the Outlaws match. And I told Flame this yesterday on another stream, on my same stream. I was like, I actually thought that their GOATs on Eichenwald, at least. Now, granted, you did play a lot of Sombra variation of GOATs, was not that bad. I thought you could walk away from Eichenwald, and just like Flame said, if they had just not gotten owned by Bumper, if they had literally just blocked a couple more shatters, they could have potentially gone to a Game 5 series with Titan.
My argument though was that, and let me be clear, I do not think in general that running Sombra into the Titans is a good idea. And the reason why I think that is we've seen, as Flame was alluding to, the Soul series where basically the Titans give you no time to efficiently use Sombra because anytime that she's appearing on the flank, they all in the other 5 members and they play very aggressively away from the Sombra. And so that leads to slower EMP generation, not a lot of time to get hacks, etc. So in general, I would say that most teams should probably play, shy away from playing the Sombra. That said, on Eichenwald B, there was a very strong effort with Sombra from the Houston Outlaws. And I think the frustration that I had was that this is another example of objectively good play versus an optimal play in the moment or an optimal play for a specific team. And my argument would be that you can say you got owned by Bumper, but a way not to get owned by Bumper is to EMP him. And if you had been playing Sombra GOATs on attack there, because for whatever reason, on Eichenwald B, on that day, at that point in time, the Titans seemed to be weak to Sombra. That is uncharacteristic of them, but that is what we literally saw happen on the defense, because you guys got rolled on A and then had to defend, the rest of the time on B, and you successfully defended on B. So my argument would be like, if you're getting rolled by Bumper, and you got rolled by Bumper multiple fights in a row, is there an argument to switch off to something that we saw was working?
It's a big assumption. I think it's a big assumption.
Yeah, that's like a big assumption. It's like, so I'll talk about our defense in general. We actually always get rolled on A. This is like a consistent problem that we always have in scrims. It's like we were glad that they rotated their entire team high ground against our Farah comp because it burned a minute that we wouldn't have gotten if they had just gone to point, because we actually usually lose A defense. We're actually very, very competent and good at B. I think one of the biggest reasons why they struggled so much on B and in general was because we forced a Winston matchup, and a Winston matchup for Muma is always going to go in Muma's favor. I mean, I don't want to sound super cocky, but I think that that's the general consensus of our team and of Muma, is that if you can make someone else play Winston into him, that is always going to be an Outlaws favored matchup in some form.
Okay.
And especially
feels
if you
like that's going to be key to the rest of the point.
Well, it's a Winston. Yeah, it's like a Winston versus Winston, Sombra versus Winston. How those matchups like work and how that entire like dynamic works. So our defense on B is actually very good, and a lot of that does come down to Muma knowing all of like the right angles where to prime. Like our team is very good at stalling the cart, knowing how to die at the right times, etc. Attack Sombra in general, I would say, is pretty rough, especially on maps like Eichenwald, where if they have castle control, the only real access point to get behind is through the staircases, and those are very narrow chokes, and so your Sombra doesn't really get EMP too quickly. And then if you look at stats for Toronto, or for Vancouver in specific, they actually have a 50% win rate when getting EMP'd, and that is like astronomically high. I'm sure that's a statistical outlier in the league. And so they're good enough to know that when we don't have EMP, they should be winning fights anyway. And then if they're winning 50% when we do have EMP, then that's also like, it should be higher for us.
Yes.
And so we agree that in general, playing Sombra against the Titans is not a good idea.
Well, yeah, but Attack Sombra doesn't end the game is the problem. Attack Sombra, you can run like a Pharah Sombra comp sometimes to like get to bridge, and maybe like you'll luckily take bridge. But against Ana's like design, the Ana Goats comp in general is designed specifically to deal with DPS and to deal with Sombra. And so realistically in our heads, I mean, and even like strategically, it makes more sense to try to take an Ana Rein fight with Bumper Muma, because again, we're not like afraid of Bumper's Reinhardt versus Muma's Reinhardt. Like that's not, like I think they play better around Bumper maybe, but in like a straight Rein v Rein matchup, you very rarely expect Muma to lose shatter battles, or to get shattered in general. And I think that that's a very fair statement to say. Like Muma even had the most earth shatters per, or most hits per, I don't know what the word is. Most shatters per earth shatter.
I think it was most stuns.
Yeah, most stuns per shatter. Most knockdowns per shatter in stage 1. So like we're not, the matchup was actually pretty good for us, I would say, just to take the mirror. But Sombra on that point and in that like specific scenario is like, they're just gonna run downhill at you while Dante is like trying to flank, and then you just get ran over, and then Bumper's hitting shatters, and all of their grabs are fine because we don't have a diva, so they're just, Sominsu's just like farming your entire team this whole time. And like when you get to the bridge phase 2, it's, the Sombra can't really flank because you have to like go through castle. You have to like somehow get behind them on the cat. Like the Sombra there doesn't really work. And while our team is pretty good at Sombra Goats, like I think if Sombra Goats was like good enough to run there, we would have obviously ran it, because I would say our Sombra Goats was our strong point in stage 1. And I think now teams are getting a lot better against Sombra. Like Zarya's don't get EMP'd anymore, Lucio's don't get EMP'd anymore. And if you can stop either one of them from getting EMP'd, then it's very easy to take fights against Sombra now, because I think the old meta was like, if you EMP'd Rein Zarya, you just won. But now if you only EMP Rein, the Zarya bubbles the Rein, and then he lives, etc., etc. And so it gets a little bit more dicey than I think stage 1 meta made it seem. And Eichenwald is also just like a really hard map to flank.
Okay. Avast, do you actually think that this was winnable?
No, I don't think it was winnable, but I do think that they could have put up a better performance, like a map 5. I think, like I talked about, I think Eichenwald could have gone a different way. I don't think Sombra Goats is the answer on offense. I think the terrain for Sombra isn't bad, but the problem is like the quintessential problem with Sombra, at the end of the day, especially once you're against Titans, is that, and you need to win, you're getting to the bridge fight, is that you need to win one fight. But where do you pick that one fight you win? Do you pick the fight on you're going uphill, and then now you're on the bridge? And the bridge makes it even harder to get an effective EMP on the back line and front line because they're split, because you're going to be playing generally more split. So you get to Eichenwald second, and the back line is going to be playing split. You know Slime and Twilight are going to, like, they're just not going to let you get value out of EMP. Like, it's just not going to happen. And because of the nature of the bridge, you're so much more cover to run from a Sombra. So the problem is then you're playing to, so you win one fight going up the hill, and then you get to your second fight on the bridge, and you're hoping you'll get EMP in time. And you're hoping your EMP will get value. And that's like always the problem with Sombra Goats versus Goats, and why I think the argument of running that composition rather than running the, a 3-3 mirror is just not viable on that particular part of the map.
We have seen successful Sombra attacks on that point of Eichenwald.
We have
seen successful EMPs, and I think what this conversation boils down to is that the fundamental disagreement that we're not going to get over is that my opinion is that it is less likely for you to win that mirror than to pick a suboptimal strategy against the Titans. I think that actually gives you a better chance of winning because of my observations of the Titans as a team and how they react to strategies that they may not be accustomed to seeing on certain points. And I think like that's where the fundamental breakdown occurs, is that like the issue here was one where the Outlaws were saying, in a perfect world of Overwatch, this is what should happen. And I am on board with a lot of what Flame's saying. But the problem is that I don't agree that was the best strategy to use at that point in time for the Houston Outlaws against the Vancouver Titans specifically.
Okay, what about this then? Because another aspect that you can definitely go into on this, Flem, I want to ask you this, was another element of this wasn't just whether in this specific case you had a better chance to win the game or not. Obviously, people are going to disagree on that one in this call, especially because you obviously see the scrims and we don't, so people are just having to speculate. But my question would be this. I noticed you guys from the Outlaws tried to also tie this into the concept of like, if you know you're going to lose the game anyway, you practice and play for how you want to play for the whole stage and how you want to improve in the future, and hopefully win future matches by playing these games this way, as opposed to essentially what Monty's alluding to is something along the lines of like a cheese. You try to do something that would just work this one time, but it might win you this match. So how would you come down on that aspect, Flame?
I don't think that's... I mean, I don't know. From the perspective of Overwatch currently, and this isn't like a historically thing. This is a like GOATS meta this year. I would say this patch specifically is very cut and dry in terms of which comps have advantage against each other. I think last patch you could run Sombra GOATS into GOATS a little bit more successfully. I think a lot of that had to do with like teams not being ready for it. I think Sombra was like a nuance last stage to a lot of teams. This stage it's a lot harder, but I don't think you can get away with cheese on payload maps in particular, because at the end of the day, the game is all about stalling this payload. And there's like some heroes that are just always going to be more optimal at stalling the payload. D.Va, Reinhardt, like the concept of Ana, Winston is like a very good reason why teams are running Ana Winston. It just gets time out. Like you have to kill a Primal, then you have to kill a Nano Winston, and then they cycle, and then it just creates like a barrier, I guess, for you. But the concept of like practicing for the season, I mean, Vancouver was one of our primary scrim partners last stage, so we knew them pretty well, and even now we're scrimming them a lot more because our match is over. So like we know their tendencies. I think if you watch that match analytically, like super analytically, you would see that Busan, I felt like they kind of fed into us. Yes. There was like that clip of Linkster just taking a bunch of 1v1s for no reason, so they weren't playing well that day.
They also started Stitch against you, which...
Agreed. But I don't think that Stitch is gonna force Bumper or who was the Lucio? It's not Twilight. It's
Slime
to take a 1v1 with Soldier 76. And then if you looked at Eichenwald, there was the play where they pushed in on attack on second, and they decided that it was going to be an intelligent decision to try to nano a Reinhardt that shattered us 1v6, and they threw their ults away. So I think like from our perspective, even that match in general, they didn't feel like they were playing serious Overwatch. And I mean, that's always been the tone between our scrims. Like they'll wipe us, we'll wipe them, and then they message us and say, go duo, ? Like it's like a joke. It's like if Muma pins Bumper off the map, he'll say go like duo. And so they were spamming that in match chat the entire game. And like, I know that, but they don't know that. But it's not feasible, I think, right now to be like practicing cheese comps for payload maps, because GOATS will always find a way. Does that make sense? Like you'll always wind up back on GOATS. Sure. There's more of a Sombra that you can run into like DPS comps, and that's a version of GOATS. There's just like Ana GOATS versus Zen GOATS, which has like a really weird nuance matchup where like you play for anti-nades, or like tempo with Ana versus like transes and Discord with Zen. Which like if you look at Paris, I think our biggest mistake actually was running Zen, not Ana on attack. I think that match goes, I don't want to say differently, but I think we have a much higher win percentage, which wasn't even talked about, back to the point of people focusing on this DPS idea. The game's not in a state where you can get away with a lot of this stuff. Like trust me, we tried Junkrat Pharah for a while, we tried Junkrat Mei, we tried Symmetra Bastion, like we've tried it all. There's places for them on defenses on certain maps, Paris in particular, maybe Anubis, Hanamura, but in general, when it comes to like these long drawn out objective fights, like GOATS is just always going to trump most comps.
So let's describe why that is, because like I think a lot of people don't really understand why the GOATS is so powerful right now. And at its most basic level, it boils down to the fact that in a game that is based around clustering on objectives, whether it's an assault point or a payload, you get insane rewards from high HP pools and a large amount of sustain, because the damage, when you are a professional team and you are very well coordinated, you can speed onto those objectives very quickly with Lucio, and then you can just sit there, and the damage isn't such that you're going to be able to punish those high HP pools before the supports are able to provide enough healing to the tanks. And so you have no great way to remove the tanks from the objective. Otherwise, the only way to do it is sort of like this very, very slow process of like poking them slowly off the point with like a Pharah and controlling sightlines with Widowmaker. And that takes a lot of time. And if it fails, you just lost like a minute and a half of your time bank. So that at the most basic level is why GOATS is so prevalent, and why it is it's not even remotely arguable that this is the optimal way to play the game in most circumstances.
Okay. Another angle as well, Flem, I want to get your take on was basically, I know it was Jake who actually said this, but when he made the comment where he used the Chengdu Hunters, who obviously have been the most off-meta team over the first two stages, when he used them as the example that like you can't basically imply that someone else could replicate their success with DPS comps in, I mean, he said a week of practice, like the idea of just practicing for this one match. Like, I don't want that to be a straw man. Like, you don't have to play as well as the Chengdu Hunters, presumably. But, like, what's the gist of that from your guys? Because as you've been alluding to, presumably you've tried a whole bunch of scrims with these DPS comps, right? You've attempted to make them work. So what would you say to that?
I think Jake's comment was more against the idea of, just play DPS. Like, because
Okay.
I feel like the general consensus after that match was the casters, the analysts, the crowd. I mean, like the people on Twitter, this whole like Overwatch community was like, just play DPS. Like I posted some like very normal tweet. It was like, we played well. Like GG's Vancouver, very strong. Like nothing we could really do, but I'm proud of Arhan, etc. And then like my entire like replies and DMs are just like flooded with, why don't you guys just play more DPS? You look so good on DPS. And I think that's like the very like, that's like that was like Jake's kind of addressing of like, how do these people think this way? And like I agree, and it's like you don't want to say like the people in your Twitter or whatever are like mud brains, but when it comes down to like those tweets, when those tweets are coming at you and you're getting barrage, I think Jake and I felt pretty emotional about like how the team goes. And I think that's like part of the Outlaws' life right now, is because we feel very like, I don't want to say there's a lot of adversity on Outlaws right now. Like I think we're understaffed. I think that's like an obvious statement. There's a lot of stress, and so when we do like, especially for that week, it felt like we accomplished something. Like our scrims don't always go well, but when you go into that match and you feel like you played well, you feel like people should be talking about the fact that you're playing well. And I think that it was like offensive to me and Jake that everyone's takeaway was like,
I think you are
just play more
overstating
DPS.
this. I think you're
I
overstating
agree.
this.
I agree 100%. As someone that's seen the dugout of a, I mean, let's take for example Boston season 1, last season Boston. As someone that was in the dugout, everyone was like, "This team's garbage. Like, look at this team." Like
no, for sure. I mean it like that. I just meant more. I think Jake's perspective on that tweet was, people think running DPS is easy, but Chengdu is arguably the best at it, and they still can't beat Titans with it, and they still like are losing matches that. Realistically, I think the skill level of the players on Chengdu is very high. I think that they have incredible players on their team. Their direction, I think, is interesting. I mean, they're going for the DPS. We're going to run ball all the time. We're going to try to win with Hammond, and it's cool, but they're still not top tier because of that decision.
Are you very, very close to just saying that actually you're going to go the other way and Chengdu Hunters should run GOATS all the time? Don't be coy here, mate.
I think Chengdu made a choice to not. I think when it comes down to it, when it boils down to it right now, the league is split. I'd say that there's like there's a top tier echelon, there's a middle tier echelon, there's a low tier echelon of teams.
Check my power ranking.
I think Chengdu can take maps off of, or matches off of like maybe the bottom 12, 13, maybe 14 teams with their DPS comp because of how non-perfected the GOATS is on those teams.
Okay. Yes.
Like, so I think that it's smart from I don't know, I guess from like an analytical or strictly numbers perspective, if they think that they can beat 14 of the 19 other teams in the league with their DPS ball comp, that's probably fine. And that's a strategy that they've gone with. I don't think that they're guaranteed to beat those 14 teams. I think that they'll probably lose a lot more than 14 of those, matchups just because GOATS will trump them a lot. Okay. And so their strategy, I think, makes sense if they feel like their GOATS is so bad that it would put them in that bottom echelon tier of gamers, which maybe that is exactly how they feel. That's not my perspective. I think that that's not the perspective of a lot of teams. I do think that there would probably be some teams. There are some teams that would benefit from the Chengdu mentality, for like specifically maybe Justice or Miami. Teams that just very clearly can't run goats. Maybe it's time to let Saya player play some DPS heroes and maybe try to force it into their lineup, and see what happens. But
hopefully someone from the organization now comes out like, Flem is underestimating the time it would take Saya player to be ready to play DPS comps. Just a week is not enough.
No, I just
and your ignorant comments have incited fans to tweet at Saya player.
No, I don't think that they should swap now. But my point was that I think that some teams could have, and I don't think that was the direction most teams took. And I think from Outlaws' perspective, I don't want to say we're super good at goats, but we're pretty competent.
We'll get to that part in a minute, because that was tied into that whole
But I think Jake's whole point was just like, if people think DPS is going to work, why isn't Chengdu just swamping more people when they practice it every day? And that was kind of his straw man argument, which, I think Jake tweeted pretty emotionally, even more so than I did that day. But
let's just say his tweets weren't great.
Copy pastas were out, as Monty said.
Yeah, the pasta was delicious.
And I think that's a fair point,
mic closer to your face.
A little bit too much sauce.
Who, me or Flem?
Yeah, you.
Me?
A little bit too much
you
sauce
move
on
your
that
face
pasta.
closer to your mic.
There we go.
There,
we'll bring it closer. So yeah, but I agree with all of that, and I think teams. I think also we're getting into a discussion of why GOATS is good is because teams are risk averse.
Yes.
Teams are risk averse, and there's a reason GOATS is so strong on top of the reasons you stated, Monty. But it's also because there's no risk in doing it. And I think when you go into a season as a professional team and you've been seeing the same strategy for a year now, and you know how the strongest teams are going to be playing the strategy, and then you try to drop a patch and the strategy is still the best, despite the fact that we're trying to get rid of it, teams are not going to move away from it. And we're having to deal with the fact that experimentation can mean death. It can mean you lose a series.
Sure.
And it's better to choose a strategy that you have a potentially better chance at winning at overall throughout the season and improving yourself throughout the season than it is to experiment and cheese.
Can I make a statement that isn't, I don't want to make it controversial, but I do think Overwatch would benefit, and I think that it's a fault of the game mode. I think GOATS is a fault of the game mode, arguably a little bit more so than the game fundamentally, if that makes sense. The fact that you have to sit on this payload is the reason why this comp is good. I think that you should get away with DPS comps on a lot of maps, especially Busan. They weren't going to run Winston Goats at us on Busan and win. We were expecting them to. We were going to run this anyway. That Torb strat was good against Winston Goats. It was good against Zen Goats. We were ready for it. A lot of that comes back to the idea of the objective. And then I wonder how much difference it is in the league if Goats is the off map, if it's one payload map, maybe you're only good at GOATS on one map now versus map. I think map geometry is playing into the hand of this a little bit more, and then the objectives are also maybe two CPs would stray people away from GOATS because they'd experiment more, but we'll never know that. But currently as it stands, that's not the case. But
hey, that's a good point. That's a good point to make, and I think probably in general you're right. And so why I have to explain too, why I was frustrated about this, because this, what Avast is saying is true, is that teams are very risk averse at the professional level, but the whole idea of teams having styles is because not every meta is going to work for every team. And in the history of esports, I would say that for whatever reason, this year in the Overwatch League teams are just ridiculously risk averse. As a thought experiment, so you have all these teams that are playing GOATS that aren't the Chengdu Hunters, basically. And what's frustrating to watch, I think, for me and other people, is that if you think about every team must necessarily have a ceiling for how good their GOATs can be based on their coaching staff, players, in-game shot callers, their own strengths. So even though you have a meta, and we can all agree that meta is objectively the best way to play the game, if you're good at it, it doesn't mean that every team is going to be able to play GOATs at a high level. If your GOATs ceiling on your team is very low, then you are basically consigning yourself to be a dumpster tier team. Because you are saying that our ceiling on this meta is so much lower than everybody else's. But what everybody's doing is just trying to reach that team's individual ceiling, if you know what I mean. That's all I see teams doing. Even though it doesn't take a lot for teams, like I can't tell if they're deluded or what is happening, because some teams should be objectively taking more risk because their GOAT ceiling is never going to get them up there. And the problem with understanding this too is that there's multiple ways to think about this. If you play off meta to heroes that play to your strength, and you know that Blizzard is attempting to balance the game in a way that is, eventually GOATs is going to go away. They keep throwing stuff at it. Eventually it will crush it. But if you know that that's the case, then by practicing off-meta strategies on this patch, even though you might lose some games via experimentation, in some ways you're also rolling the dice on saying, okay, we're going to be good at a future strategy on a future patch, right? Because right now, if your GOAT ceiling is very low, all you're doing is saying, we are a terrible GOATs team. We will lose all our matches. And then we're not even going to be prepared for the future other patches that are coming down the line. And we don't even have an idea of how our team is supposed to play because we spent all our fucking time wasting it teaching people who will never be able to play GOATs how to fucking play GOATs. And now we're good at fucking nothing when the next patch rolls around. I
think that assumes a multitude of things, though.
Sure.
I think it assumes A, that teams all know that their ceiling is at this set point. You're assuming that teams don't think they can expand
my perception is they're not. The level of self-awareness of teams across the league is so low because universally they are doing it.
Yeah, but what's your end game though here? Like, okay, let's like for argument's sake, let's say we had ran DPS on Paris Attack, which I do think would have been a viable strategy. I do think we actually could have ran like a Farah comp if we had decided.
You got one elimination in that.
That's what happens. That's the GOATs matchup though. That happened across multiple matches this weekend actually. But point being
that was
there was
the
we watched one yesterday.
Offense in particular, Paris offense.
Yeah, we watched one
yesterday.
Bad.
And defense.
That was pretty bad.
Defense.
Like Paris first can break teams over the knee like Bane to Batman. Like
when you design a map where the only way in and out is this one small choke, like, and ult advantage happens the way it does. I mean, our mistake was popping trans when we did. That's a separate conversation. Point being, you're essentially, if we wanted to, I don't know how to put this. First of all, it's a personnel issue, right? Because if we're playing a DPS comp, maybe it's a Junkrat, maybe it's a Mei, maybe it's a Torbjorn. Jake's probably playing, right? So it's a different lineup. Dante's probably not a different hero. He's probably not playing off tank. He's probably playing Tracer or something. This is all like hypothetical and like idealistic. Jiri's maybe playing Soldier. Like you can't run that on Eichenwald and win. You just can't. You can win GOATs snowball. GOATs is like designed to snowball. If you win the first fight with GOATs, regardless of how bad your GOATs is, you should win another fight, the ensuing fight coming up after. So regardless of how bad your GOATs is, the comp ease of execution at a base level is pretty easy. Hit your grab bob combos, use your abilities, don't trans when you don't need to, save your cooldowns for the correct time. I think the neutral game is definitely more nuanced, and teams like Shock and Vancouver are very good at it. Do I feel like we got plowed in the neutral game by Vancouver this weekend? No. Do I feel like we shot ourselves in the foot on Paris? 100%. But
I don't want to talk about
there's no
specific...
my point is, like, if you're us, like, what would you expect us to do though? Like, if you're trying to push this narrative of like trying new things, it's like, do you want teams to be trying to run Farah Junkrat on attack on like Rialto? Like, they'll just lose. And then how much practice are they putting into this? It's like the trade-off is like very, your argument there is very small because even going into stage 1, people didn't expect GOATs to be the meta because Blizzard was trying to patch it out for stage 1. They went even harder
I've got
for
a
stage
counter
2.
for you, Flem. I've got a counter for you here, mate. What about this? So one of the worst aspects of Jake's strawman, which I understand, he was emotional, so he just went he did the ad absurdum. He just went to the extreme of like the most ridiculous example possible. Okay. But if you even take just the grain of what he was saying, the idea of like, basically like, what's the point in throwing away a week trying to do something that you're not going to do against other people anyway, right? Here, there's two aspects to that I want to ask. One is like, because obviously you don't have to get to the Chengdu Hunters level of DPS. Why is that like a wasted week? And secondly, surely if it even vaguely works against the Titans, it could now work even better against someone who isn't the Titans. So it's not exactly a one and done necessarily. Like if you got anything out of it at all, running something alternate, you might be able to get that even more against someone else. Because the one part I didn't buy about this whole angle, in fact, generally, I think it's one of the most bullshit excuses in esports. I fucking hate it. In fact, you know what? I'll even bring Monty in here and flame him a little bit. So whenever Monty would always talk about the advantage Koreans had in League of Legends, he would always say, well, you know, they've got like 10 years of an industry behind, this is obviously a long time ago, 10 years of industry behind them, you know, coaches from past games, like, you know, so much experience. And even though that does have an element to it, right? I would say maybe that counts for like the last 5% of topping up the max bar of how effective you are. The problem with that logic is almost every really great League of Legends team was created for that season. That lineup never played before, and everyone starts at zero. You all start at zero as a team and go to wherever you go at the end of the season, whether that's the champion or the worst team. So I've never bought this angle of like acting as though like we've got like a 10-year NFL franchise where we're going to gradually build things up and look for this one piece that doesn't, like, that doesn't exist in esports. Like every team, the Vancouver Titans obviously did have a core, but every team generally is starting at zero in the meta. They're practicing up. Some people get really good, which ties into Monty's angle of like, surely you should recognize at some point in time that you don't even have basic competency on the meta. Therefore, you almost never win. Like that's almost inarguable. The people who can't run goats at all, it's mental that they still run it. Like, what do they expect is going to happen? But then the other angle is like, is there nothing you gain out of it? Like, surely sometimes when it's like the best team, it is worth trying to snipe them.
So yeah, I mean, like I hear you, right? And like in a vacuum, or in a world that's not Overwatch, that would probably make a lot more sense, I think, because like so the issue here, right, is if I run attack DPS comp, there are so many easy counters to beat a good DPS comp. Right. There's Sombra, there's Moira, there's Soldier, there's like the culmination of the three. There's Ana in general is a good hero against it. Chengdu has a very large uphill battle. The idea of Chengdu is that they're expecting their opponents to not get off normal goats, or they're expecting them to be so bad at the Sombra Moira or the Soldier comps that they just can't beat Chengdu.
Or they think that they're so good at running them that they can overcome these obstacles.
But they don't have win conditions.
They don't. No.
So their win condition is like the enemy team falls over and doesn't really understand how to beat them. Like the way to beat the... Yes, but that's not Outlaws. That's not Vancouver. So if we had so Oasis, there's an Oasis comp that Vancouver runs, and we're ready for it, where they run Soldier Brig goats. They drop the D.Va and they run Soldier Brig, or maybe they drop the Zarya and they run Soldier Brig. I think they drop the Zarya and they run Soldier Brig. That comp inherently would dumpster any like Pharah comp, any real Sombra comp, any Tracer comp. You can't play Tracer into Brig Soldier. You can't play Sombra into Brig Soldier. You don't want to.
By the way, just as a quick aside, this is just a very quick aside. You're actually doing vacuum thinking yourself, because you're doing what I also hate from League of Legends, which is that like every single LeBlanc in the world is the same LeBlanc. Every single Garen is the same Garen. Like no Faker on LeBlanc could win games, mate, when LeBlanc wasn't even in the meta.
I think in the context of
the question here would be like, does Outlaws have top tier DPS personnel? If they do, then we can have this discussion. If you're willing to admit that you don't have top tier DPS personnel, then we can just immediately eliminate that argument entirely.
Are we even looking at the context of Vancouver anymore?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Have we moved past Vancouver? Because like
the entire episode isn't about the Vancouver Titans match. Because for start off,
I thought we were going.
First of all, 3 minutes. Yeah, no, we are.
Style in the league, not specifically this match. We can continue to talk about.
You can keep tying it into this meta, by the way. Don't worry about that.
I guess from like, well, Duncan's question was more along the lines of, what's the value? Okay. And there is value. There is value. We do practice DPS comps. Like there are a lot of DPS comps.
Wait. One question. Yes. I'm not attacking you when I say this. It's a real question. Sure. Why do you bother practicing them? They don't work.
For certain maps.
For certain maps,
certain map geometry still determines if
obviously
is viable. Sure. But like at the end of the day, we're all assuming here, when we have this DPS, and it's been brought up before, everyone's assuming that why are you not playing DPS is assuming that as if these teams haven't spent countless hours trying DPS before and having it lose. Like you don't just suddenly come to the conclusion DPS isn't good. Like,
Yeah.
you don't just say like, I'm not gonna play DPS.
Especially us, because I do think if like we could run Junkrat Orisa more often, we would all the time.
Sure.
If we could run Soldier Pharah, we would. I think Arhan's flexibility is actually very, very high. He doesn't play a lot
if he can get in the game, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But my point being more so that like these comps exist and we do practice them, but Eichenwald isn't the place for it.
Yeah, exactly. I agree.
And so like we have those strategies. We use them. We ran a Torbjorn and won with it. We ran a Soldier, a Widow, and a Tracer, and a Sombra, like and a Hammond. Like we won with them. There was a place.
Well, you did it on Busan.
Yeah, that's what I mean. We're good at those comps. Yeah, that's what I mean. We're good at those comps. You can run them on Paris. We didn't decide to, but you can. But the point
Avast,
is that,
where the fuck were you on your own stream, Homer? You were just sat back like, and this guy just hanging himself from the nearest lamppost. Why weren't you piping up on that? Giving him some help there, guys, the backup.
ZP was doing it.
He was cashing in.
Listen, you can't blame everything on ZP. We all know he's an annoying guy.
ZP compared everything I said to traditional sports and was like, well, Scott Smith would say this.
I was just laughing. I noticed it was working for me and the money was rolling in, so I was just laughing because the comments
so
were
the thing
so
about his stream is it's not a place for discussion, it's a place for memes and ranting.
Right.
So,
and if you're super, it's a place for Super Smash Bros.
It's and it's funny too, Monty, you say that because you come in yesterday and just drop we know where Donko is, and everyone's upset about me, upset with me now, as if I did that. Well, I've been purposely avoiding that.
Who is upset with you?
Everyone. The chat was all like, "Oh, you stupid," and then Super, of course, because he's an idiot. He's like, "Oh, once again, like you're just gonna say something and not do it." It's like it's Monty.
People were not upset with you. They were just joking around.
They were memeing.
I'm just saying, guys. You know,
you say upset.
Don't blame me. But that's the end all of the discussion. I think with Flame's point and broadcast point is at the end of the day, I don't think you can make any assumptions for teams that are playing like 60 to 80 hours a week of scrims and assume that they haven't tried these compositions before.
I mean, they're not playing that many hours a week of scrims.
I mean, not now. I think season 1, perhaps.
Let's put a caveat on that. Okay, you can't make those assumptions about teams. So I'll give you some good caveats. So Flame's team has had a similar core for a long time. There we go. They probably know their personnel very well. You can't do it for teams that actually have shown they could win games. I'd agree with you on that. I think all the things that we've said, by the way, apply to all the worst teams in the Overwatch League. Those teams don't know what the fuck they're doing, by the way. And the idea that they could play a billion hours of scrims. Some of those people, it's like running your head into a brick wall over and over again. So I would agree generally, as a general principle, yeah, you're probably right. The teams generally probably know best. That is very different, though, from the discussion of what should an analyst say they should do, though.
Yes.
Well, that will always be, by the way. And listen, I'm not. This is why I'm saying it not to attack you, Flame. But that will always be the ultimate dirty trick that any team member can use on an analyst, which is like, but you don't know why we do that from scrims that you don't get to see. It's like, well, yeah, no shit, genius. Like,
I can
that's why my job.
Information that
my job is literally to fill the gaps of what we cannot see on the screen. Like, I have to guess. So in that scenario, unless you want to come on here and do this as well, I have to guess. Like, so I'm not saying. By the way. That's totally legitimate. Like, if you then fill in some information, I'm sure the analysts will take it on board. But it's just an easy out on that one, Like, you can make the point.
I think until what's the word? I mean, there's a level of that. I agree. There's definitely a problem there in, I guess, like the raw sense of what you're saying, because it like I guess from like my perspective, and I guess maybe my perspective is a little skewed because I've done analysis for Overwatch. Like, historically, I've done a lot of analysis for Overwatch, and even coaching now, like going into scrims and giving feedback to players, we have this discussion actually pretty normally. It's like, yes, your comp sucked, but why did you lose? And it's like, yes, if you had played Pharah here, maybe we win this scrim. And like, that's like the thing. It's like, oh, they didn't have a diva, they're running Orisa, we should have been on Pharah. And that's like the lazy version of our scrims, and we get mad at that.
Yes.
Because it's like, yeah, dude, just swap out a hero. You can't really refute Monty's point, right? Monty says, oh, if they played DPS here, maybe they'd have more success. You can't really argue against it because there's no data. There's nothing to say against that.
Well, I mean, you did try and argue against it.
No, I'm saying, but everyone knows on like a professional and like an analytical level why Pharah is not going to work against Vancouver, or why Sombra historically doesn't work against Vancouver, and also just like why Sombra doesn't why you wouldn't run Sombra there. Like, I'd rather have a conversation about why Sombra's bad on attack Eichenwald against Vancouver, or, you know, why Vancouver does so well against Sombra, versus like this idea that maybe if we had played a different comp, we had a better chance of winning. Because back to the original argument too, when you look at these bad teams, the best DPS comps are still generally worse than like a mediocre team playing goats. Like the best.
Isn't that also because most of the worst teams have the worst players, and therefore logically they don't have really good DPS?
No,
like that seems pretty obvious to me, man.
I would say Vancouver. I would say Washington and Mayhem in particular would have been better in a DPS meta.
Yes, I agree with that.
And so these teams are like the worst right now. And
isn't that also though because like if you're not very good at goats, you will lose nearly all the time?
Yes, you will lose all the time if you were bad at goats.
Yeah, I mean you will, but that goes back.
That's the problem.
But that's a statement.
Like there's more variance in dive. Put it that way. You can just pop off and win a game in
improve.
dive that you wouldn't.
You're still making the assumption these teams don't think they can improve, right? These teams are always thinking they can improve at the meta.
But that's the problem.
Avast, you're perfectly right there.
Talking about
that's what analysts have to do.
Yeah, but then the mentality of the team becomes like, if I play this good comp or this comp optimally that I think is good, there's still no win condition against goats, which comes back to like this bigger problem with like the concept of Brigida and the concept of nano boost. It just destroys all these DPS compositions. And so even if you try to
Chengdu Hunters are still 50% in this league.
Yeah, but that's good for they're beating teams that don't know how to play against DPS comps. That's them preying on the weakness of other teams. You cannot do that against the Vancouver Titans. You can't do that against the Vancouver Titans.
So you believe that the Vancouver Titans have no weaknesses because we've seen them have weaknesses.
Their weakness, yeah, I don't think that's not my point, but the point is their weakness against the way Shock played against them was to alpha up. The problem with goats in general, actually, is it's very much a mental game. If you think you can take the fight to someone and you take the fight to someone, you will win most of the time. It's a very like initiator advantaged meta. It's like the person who throws the first punch generally wins, and the person who keeps swinging generally wins. And the way Shock actually made it close with Vancouver was by letting Super just go in and, you know what, Bumper, come and take it. And that was the most successful strategy anyone's had so far.
But that's because the Shock are a good goats team capable of playing goats with goats-oriented players. And they have a very high ceiling. Like, yes, the San Francisco Shock do have a chance to beat.
Yeah, but then what's your argument? But then what's your argument for the Seoul match being close? Because Seoul, I think, was played pretty poorly on goats that day, but they still made that match very close. And
which match was close?
The most recent one against Vancouver, I think it was Thursday, or we played Saturday, so it was Thursday.
I mean, they got wrecked.
It was 3-1, and Eichenwald was very close.
Yeah, but most of those maps were really one-sided.
Yeah, but most of those maps meaning Koth and 2CP, which is the opposite of like the maps that we're like arguing in the context of the Outlaws match. So like, if you look at it from that perspective, Seoul didn't play a great game of goats and still almost beat them on 2 goats maps.
I mean,
so there's like an argument that
Titans are not good at Eichenwald. That's
sure, but then there's still no like world here where we could have ran. There's no weakness that's exploitable. That doesn't involve us playing goats.
I guess
we keep coming back to this, Flame, but that is where we have the fundamental difference. Like we're not going to convince each other.
Yeah, I don't think it's gonna happen there. I want to refocus the combo, then ask a separate question. Then Monty is then because I'm sort of like I mean, it appears that like I'm relatively somewhat on the side of Flame here, and it's more of I guess then the question becomes: should teams practice to be the best possible team they could ever be to win throughout the season, or should they practice to which gives them their personal best chance, right? Like, because if everyone's practicing
personal best chance,
like but then the pretty much you're admitting to the fact that no matter what happens, and if you're playing to your personal best chance, you will never beat the best teams.
Yes.
Ever.
Yes. That is legit.
What a bizarre setup. No. Okay, yeah, go on.
No. Because here's that doesn't work. Because here's the thing. If you're trying to play the meta game, let's take the Vancouver Titans. They have 6 months more of experience than you do playing goats because they played it all through Contenders. So they're all already coming in with like an absolutely enormous advantage. Huge, right? And so when they come in and they're still able to play this composition at the highest level and play the meta at the highest level, I think yes. The answer is you do have to just accept the fact that if you also play goats, you will fucking lose. Like, for the most part, that's true. Unless you are an ultra elite team. We haven't seen that NYXL matchup yet. We saw the San Francisco matchup twice. One time both times it was very close. And, San Francisco, I think, had a legitimate chance to win in the finals. But I think for the vast majority of teams, that it is not feasible to believe that you are going to beat elite teams with goats. So you might well do something else.
So let me flip this and take this to another. Let's add on to this statement, because let's say you're Outlaws. We play Fusion, we play Soul, we play Fuel. We have a lot of really nice matches coming up, some bangers, if you will.
Sure.
Shanghai, I think.
Yep.
All winnable with goats.
You're playing London.
Yeah, all winnable with goats. All these matches, 100% winnable with goats if you're the Outlaws. If you're my perspective, 100% winnable with goats. Throwing away a week of practice.
Yes.
Is
first
a
off,
large.
Thorin already said that it's not necessarily thrown.
No, but running DPS comps on Eichenwald is throwing away a week of practice, in my opinion.
That's an opinion, sure.
Being better, playing goats into Vancouver gave us more information about how to make our goats better and where our weaknesses are in goats than we would have ever gotten playing any other garbage comp against them, to the point where playing goats into Vancouver actually helps us against Seoul, against Philly, against all these other teams.
Sure.
If we were a bottom tier team, maybe you could argue that, and maybe you can argue that we're a bottom tier team. But if you look at how we played goats against Vancouver, it didn't feel like they severely bopped us. We got outplayed on a few times. We got outplayed more than a few times, but on a base
Paris
level
was the only map where
I think we see the point there, Flem, which is that if someone accepts your premise, which as we've acknowledged some people are not going to, but if someone did, then you have strengthened your premise by also pointing out that future weeks would also benefit from goats. And so in this scenario, it really would be a one and done. The point is, though, Avast did try to actually refocus it to be about all the teams, and he seemed to be quite firm on this idea. I mean, he tried to be a little bit clever and be like, is it this or is it what I really think?
I try my best.
Sorry, I saw through it quite simply. So, but here's the reason why it was confusing to me, Avast, is this. I don't know if I just have a different perspective on esports games or the way styles work out, but I've never understood how that could be considered a dichotomy. So you either try to become the best team you can, or you try to win a game this week. As far as I can tell, they're the same goal. They're just how you go about it, right? So I don't know in what universe there's a strawman world where trying to win each game each week wouldn't lend you to being a better team at the end. Likewise, I don't understand the world in which you can afford to lose a bunch of weeks and somehow that levels you up. I don't know why you wouldn't be winning on those weeks, but that would then level you up to be your top level at the end of the season. And somehow everyone else is existing in a different world or the same world where they're trying to do the same thing. Because basically that also very quickly ties into the angle on I think the point Monty was making about the bottom teams is that they do lack self-awareness. Justice really does think right, all those other weeks, we were just slipping on a banana peel every week. This week we're going to try our damnedest, and you know what? Maybe we will be the new Titans, right? If they really are sitting down and saying that, Avast, I get that there's a different mentality in teams, but they are fucking delusional on a level
it's also just about surprise factor. Again, so much, and also Flame. Where I totally agree with what you're saying, which is that the Outlaws' best chances, potentially, it's very logical. If you believe that practice against the Titans in a Goats mirror was going to serve you well in other weeks in the future. But here's what didn't make sense. You guys getting so fucking mad if that's true. Because if you thought that was true, you'd be like, you should have just said, we practice Goats because we think it gives us the biggest chance in the long run, and we knew we would probably take the loss to Titans in the mirror. That's what has to happen at the end of that, not, going out there and being mad about it. Now, to go back to the other thing, which is that if we look at Chengdu, again, going back to this, not like they don't play goats, but one of the things that I've talked to many coaches, many teams, many players about is nobody wants to fucking scrim against Chengdu because it's worthless practice because they're the only team that plays these compositions, right? But the thing that Chengdu has is a massive edge because they're the only ones you can practice against to get experience versus Chengdu, or to even have any like remote idea a lot of the time of what they're doing. But every time they practice against a team that's only playing goats, they get valuable practice in because that's what everybody's doing. So because we don't know what happens if Chengdu plays goats for an entire match, because it's literally not going to happen and never has happened, and yet they're still capable of flipping over and playing goats at least decently well when they have to or when they feel they need to, right? But they have such an insane advantage, and every other team in the league is just fucking giving up that advantage. Like, cheese is valuable.
Well, yeah, cheese is valuable and also, I will say cheese is valuable on defense. Oh, yeah, I mean, it was more just like the cheese comps are decent on defense, and you can get away with them, but they eventually fall flat, and you get snowballed by goats, and that's generally like the way the maps go. But also like the fact that when you get to the point of teams being so perfect, I think cheese is a hard word, because there's not a lot of cheese comps you can actually create in Overwatch, because they still need to function. And I've had this conversation with Jake actually a few times about like, because when we were going to go on stage for that Mayhem Day, remember that day? I don't remember what it was. It was like the day where they were like, oh, you guys are going to scrim on stage.
Are you talking about preseason?
Yeah, and we were like, and I was like, haha, well, let's start making up comps that are functional but are cheese. And we had a bunch. But there's still, it always comes down to like, okay, you want to run Bastion, you need Orisa. Okay, you want to run Mei, you probably want to run Bastion Orisa. Like, you want to run all these different heroes. And so cheese only works once, and I think you don't want to try cheese against Vancouver wasn't really in our playbook, but I mean I do think that there's a place for cheese, and I think especially us, we ran a lot of cheese last year. We were all about it. Okay. Even this year, I think we made like the Orisa comps work on well last stage way more than any other team did on Ilios. Like Mumu would just constantly be sucking people into the pit, and it was like hilarious. And no other team really tried to do it, and there's like a place for it. But I'll give another example, like the Gladiators comp yesterday with the Mei and the Bastion. Mm-hmm. That was their one shot, and they used it on Valiant, and it worked. And teams will now go back.
I disagree that it's only one shot, because that's the thing. And here's the other advantage that you have is that you always have to now comp. If they're coming into Hanamura a attack and the Gladiators are on defense, they have to assume that there is a possibility that this happens. So even if they literally never use it in the next few weeks, teams are going to have to run comps that are acceptable into that, and they're going to be afraid because like Ryan Goats is pretty not great into that, which means that they're going to have to run a different kind of goats composite, maybe like Winston goats or something else with a little more mobility to get around the Mei wall. But you're already disrupting your opponent's optimal strategies just by doing it against the Valiant. That's why sometimes you use cheese against bad teams, because you know you're going to win anyway. And so you cheese them to put it into your opponent's heads, your good opponents in the future. It's very disruptive. Well, so maybe the Gladiators comp was a bad example, because in my opinion, that Gladiators comp, that wasn't the first time that comp's been ran, by the way. Someone ran it week 1. I don't remember who it was. But that comp in particular, that point in particular is one of the few points where I think that Bastion on that high ground that actually has no access to it is probably one of the hardest counters to Rhine Goats, to the point where you don't even care if they have ults, because you can just swap to that Bastion. And it's actually, I think that comp is going to drastically change the way teams approach Hanamura going forward, because of how easy it is to just plop a Bastion on the high ground that can't be touched by anything but a D.Va, and it just forces you off Goats. But that's a defense thing again.
Yeah, it's a defense.
And even when it comes down to whoa.
Okay,
my dog's just losing her mind. But that it's just like, I don't know. There's a place for it, and I think we will cheese teams on defense. I think that like Tyrong is all about it. If we can run Junkrat, we'll run Junkrat. If we can run Mei or Bastion or Symmetra, we will. That's just not going to work against Vancouver. But I mean, I agree that there's definitely a place to be running cheese comps, and it can catch people off guard. But
I mean, even just, it doesn't have to be cheese. Even just the concept of practicing something off meta, but making that
we do it a lot. Yeah, we do it a lot.
Because I'll tie it in, right? Basically, one of the things Monty was alluding to earlier, and this was a huge problem in League of Legends, is that in League of Legends, like the meta wasn't even as strictly as defined as it is in a game like Overwatch. Because as you say, things like the terrain, the particular game mode map actually do massively play into what makes more sense. And there's a million more good stats and metrics you can run and actually find like use of them compared to something like League of Legends. But people treated League of Legends as though it was this insanely solved game every season. And as a result, famously, you could even see this through regions like North America. One of the main reasons, they still to this day don't understand this, by the way, one of the main reasons they had so little international success is that they were famously the copycat region. So what they would do is look at Koreans and go, well, I think I know what he's doing, so why don't I sort of half-ass my own reverse engineered version of that? And you were basically the equivalent of like the knockoff kid's toy that China would make, you know, instead of like a really good one. So as a result, Europe, right, who had comparable players, etc. and stuff, you know, teams weren't necessarily way better from Europe, but they would have a much better chance of doing well internationally because they would just have their own meta that they developed based on who their players were, basically. So if you were a team that didn't have like an amazing tank top laner when you had to play tank, you could play through carries then. Okay, you do that. You're not going to win against everyone, but you will win generally more. So I'm totally open to the idea. I'm not an expert with Overwatch, that maybe this very particular case doesn't apply in this area. I think it's a bit of wiggle room. Maybe you guys didn't entirely make your strongest case immediately, but what would you say on this, Monty?
I mean, I in this video that I made about like finding the Outlaws finding a style, I referenced the Flash Wolves, which are one of the most famous teams for beating Koreans repeatedly at international events, and they never played a Korean style. And I think part of it was they relied on their mechanical ability in order to take maps and matches that they didn't have any business winning. And part of the advantage that Flash Wolves always had was that if you were to be an analyst and say, this is the perfect play is this, the Flash Wolves would sometimes do exactly the opposite of that. And the Korean teams would be so surprised by them doing that, or they would think there's no way they're going to take a fight here. So maybe they get a little bit greedy, and the Flash Wolves just come in and mechanically outplay you, and then you lose. Like, so I do think that there are arguments to be made, at least in Overwatch, that while I do not think there is as much room because of the way the GOATS meta is functioning right now, the Chengdu Hunters, again, we have to go back to them, are at least providing a level of argument that teams can win in other ways. And I know you guys are theorizing that because of some of the changes that have occurred, it may be more difficult for them. And I guess we're just going to have to wait and see on that.
What about this? As a quick question then, just as a quick poll, Flem, if you had the London Spitfires roster now, would you actually, and you could go back in time, would you practice GOATS from day one all the time, or would you give something off meta a chance? With their specific roster?
I mean, not knowing their things, I'd probably try DPS to start. I mean, we tried DPS to start. The problem with this with like this conversation is that like Overwatch isn't balanced in any like basic level. Okay. And so like it's hard to make the assertion that like other comps can work. I think that last season we actually saw a lot of styles, if you will, and maybe even last stage you saw more than now. But I don't know how.
Did we really last season? It was
I think last
double
season,
sniper then Genji Tracer.
It was double sniper. There was Orisa Diva. There was like
Orisa
Junkrat. There was Orisa Rat. There was the Orisa McCree.
Yep.
There was the Hog Orisa. There was the Hanzo Hog Orisa.
There was people in Texas and there was people in the rest of the world.
No, they weren't always maps. I mean, you could make an argument that some like the dive was definitely not map specific, right?
Yeah. I feel like when we're looking at the overarching theme of like style, at the end of the day, the style is still one team. The majority of teams are like always going to be playing one particular style.
Okay, and so let me give you a different example, because I think we're tunneling on style also being a compositional thing, but it's also just a tactical thing with a composition. And the example I brought up is the Boston Uprising. Now, Boston is a team that wins fewer than 50% of their team fights. Okay, that in the history of Overwatch, that is very unusual for them to be at a winning record where that stat is true. And the way that Boston does it is their own style is not about necessarily winning every team fight in a traditional way. what they do is they surprise people in game with decisions. They have a variety of set plays that they use to disrupt the enemy, where they do unexpected things with a GOAT's composition. They have a play, or they make bold decisions in game, like we've seen them do, like playing very aggressively on certain points like Gibraltar, like right outside the spawn doors to take time off time bank. And because they do these things, they win maps and they win matches. So it's not just about, it's not like, oh, well, every team, okay, even in a world where every team only plays GOATs, there are different things you can do, and Boston has shown us that.
Well, can you really make the assertion though that Outlaws doesn't have a style after one match against the best team in the league? Like, so I guess that was another like question I had, just solely based on the fact that like stage 1 we ran Sombra Goats, and I feel like Sombra Goats was our style. If you could pick a style for Outlaws, it was Sombra Goats. Dante on Sombra, Spree on Zarya, like Muma on Reinhardt, and that was how we played, and that was our style. I think this stage we're going to start trending towards a specific one. I'm not going to like throw out our strategies, but I think after the Vancouver match we have a comp that we think works for us, specifically because I don't think we run specific variants of GOATs particularly well. I think the way that we play around specific like abilities in the game isn't so great, and I think that you'll see that going into the next couple weeks where our style lands. The assertion of like the teams don't have style for us in particular felt weird, because let's say our style was Vancouver style, like maybe we want to play the aggro Reinhardt meta and just let Muma play, like let Bumper play, and that's like our style and we go with that. Is that a problem? Like the other issue I had, I guess, with your style thing was like Hongzhou Spark is generally a Sombra Goats team, and even in their match you were like, get off Sombra, it's not going to work here.
Yeah, because they're fucking bad at it.
But my point is like they have a style and they need to. It's like the Outlaws don't have a style argument felt really weird because
so here's how it looks from the outside. Okay. So over the course, and one of the reasons why I struggle, because I'm not in your scrims watching you and the evolution of your team, but from the outside, it looks like you just switch every player onto Brigitte and Zarya at some point. And bear in mind that I've only seen 8 Outlaws games. Okay? I'm not privy to all your scrims. But when you've had 3 different Brigitte players in those 8 games, I question whether or not you have a style, because I'm seeing every time you guys develop, like every time I see a new map, it feels like there's a new Brigitte player or a new Zarya player that has to be integrated in, and it seems sort of scattershot because all of these players are being swapped around into various positions, and you have to regain the synergy for playing this GOAT's composition, which is one that demands a significant amount of communication and synergy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think Overwatch League is such a small sample size. I definitely see where you're coming from, though. I mean, week 1 of Overwatch League, we had Jiri on Brigitte.
Yes.
That did not work out.
And
we swapped Jake in.
And then he was in Zarya, and then Jake's in there. And we're talking about your style with Jake, but considering that our sample size is very small, so like every data point that we have, when you have 3 different Brigittes in 8 games, and then like Arhan just magically appears after the break, it's kind of fucking weird.
Well, I mean, Flem,
I think
here's the thing.
The same. Yeah,
you might have a totally great reason as to why you're doing it.
Maybe I do. I have a great reason. I'm not gonna reveal it on broadcast.
Which is the point. You've just made points for him. You're not going to tell us now what the real reason is. But so if he sees that, he's going to assume you don't know what you're doing.
No, but attributing. My point was more. I guess from a stage 1, you could say we didn't have a set roster. I think that's like a fair assumption. Okay. Stage 2 is a different animal. The meta is different. There are situations where different players excel at different things. There are players that don't. There are players that don't necessarily enjoy or play the meta well. Or I don't know how to explain it, but the point is like it's treating stage 2 as like a continuation of stage 1 feels weird to me.
Okay, but I'm looking at the best teams in the league that are still running this. At those positions.
Yeah.
So I understand it's different for you. So I think this is just like part of this emerged from a broad lack, like, because you're in the trenches. It's not your fault. Like, you're in there with the Outlaws today, but you don't consider how Outlaws look from the outside. So like, let me tell you the fairy tale of the Houston Outlaws. Okay. They were the scrappy team that started last year, had a lot of opportunities, right? And so they come into the league and they develop their own style. And their style is very interesting. The Houston Outlaws, they run a lot of Junkrat in, potential situations where many other teams would not run it. They start to pull off some really cool stuff with snipers. But
they don't use Korean players. Also another hallmark.
Yeah, also another hallmark. But they had one glaring weakness. In a meta where Tracer was dominant, the Houston Outlaws were very bad Tracers, okay? They didn't have a good Tracer player. And so, on the Houston Outlaws, there were 4 little Tracers that could. Clockwork, right? Jake, Linkser, and then Arhan. Sure. And every time we saw the Houston Outlaws, there was a different Tracer player, and they were all not very good. And in the meantime, while we were saying their Tracers weren't very good, from the outside perspective, some people were saying things publicly about Clockwork demecking divas as a primary point of consideration for the skill of Tracers. And so when I evaluate the Houston Outlaws and I look at the Tracer play, and I think the Houston Outlaws in this fairy tale did a very good job of finding their own style that worked for them, even though they kept on trying to ram their head against this wall of not actually having a great Tracer player on this roster. So we come to the end of the season, and they almost make season playoffs. It's pretty
shocking, right? Shocking, realistically.
If the Houston Outlaws had won one more game against Philadelphia, they would have been in the season playoffs. And you know what? I think the Houston Outlaws would have done very well in the season playoffs based on the meta.
Agreed.
I think you guys would have been fucking great, because you know what went away? The Tracer that you didn't have, and you had a great Orisa player, and you have good sniper players. I think the Outlaws could have potentially made the finals just like Philadelphia did. I don't think it's unreasonable to say that.
Unlucky.
But then, now, again, think about this from the outside. We come into this season, and you remember the 4 little Tracers that couldn't, and they kept on rotating through? Well, what's happening right now on the Houston Outlaws? It's more musical chairs. The carousel of Brigida players is rotating. And so what I look at is I say, okay, maybe Tracer was a mechanical role that these guys couldn't fulfill last season. But Brigida is a decision-making role. And so when I see all of these players rotating in and out in exactly the same way that I saw the Tracer player rotating, I do tend to have questions about the team.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I mean,
honestly, that was just a kind of that was a little bit of a nasty takedown by Monty. I'm not going to lie. I don't even know how you refute that one.
But my point...
Here's the thing. I appreciated the callback to the demecking as well. I knew that was going to come up somehow.
So personally...
It was woven in very well.
So personally, I mean, I don't think that there's a big skill discrepancy between, like, Jake or Arhan. The reason why Jake isn't playing has nothing to do with skill. I'll put that out there as, like, a straightforward answer. Okay, so like I understand the outside public perception. I don't think our roster looked weaker this week.
No, I think he looked better.
Yeah, and I don't think that was I don't think that was like Jake's fault. I don't think that I think Kumat playing has a large part to do with that. I don't think Kumat played a lot last stage, and that was maybe a mistake, and maybe we, in retrospect, realized that towards the end of stage 1, and that was a big change that we made. And maybe Kumat being in changes our roster based on like the way comm structure works or the way Muma's decision making works. There's a lot of different factors.
Sure.
Point being, I think currently we're at the strongest Outlaws that we've seen between stages 1 and stage 2. And I don't necessarily think that our style from stage 1, which was primarily Sombra Goats, regardless of who's in the roster, I felt like it was Sombra Goats. I don't think we're going to find much success with that this stage. I think we can't. There are times where we will find success with it, but I don't think we'll primarily be crutching on it as much as we did last stage. I just felt like the argument of the no style thing felt bizarre because we didn't really have time to build one in the current state of affairs. The maps are very different. The players are obviously different.
To be fair, that video was also aimed at every
I know
league, and it's a more comprehensive argument than that. But I'm just saying, like, this is how the Houston Outlaws come out from the outside, right? And it's not that I think you don't have skilled players, because I really do think you have skilled players. What it comes down to is that because you see all of this stuff going, these cycles of players that are just going through these positions, it looks really weird.
Yeah.
And it looks like there's a lack of commitment, or it feels in some ways like you guys are always like trying to just like slap the Band-Aid on and like, oh shit, we have this problem. Let's like change this player. Let's make it work this way. And it doesn't seem, and you know, you can disagree, that there is a long-term plan about the identity, the fundamental identity of this team.
Well, so
I want to add on to that, Flame, as well. I
it.
want to say, like, so we see Monty's point about rotating through all these players, and you say now we get into stage 2, so you're playing a new player, Cool Matt, and your paradigm has shifted again within your team. Wouldn't that still once again prove Monty's point that you have not figured out what you want to do?
Well, you know, he's going to imply they have a super secret reason that we can't know. That's the problem.
No. Well, I think like back to the point of the stage changing. We knew that we had an extra week off, right? We had a lot of time off compared to other teams. Nyx was on their 6th match, we're on our 1st. We had a lot of time off, so we had a lot more time to be like, okay, what went wrong in stage 1? Honestly, stage 1, 3 and 4, could we have done better? Obviously. Should we have lost map 5s twice in week 1? Should we have even gone to map 5s twice in week 1? The answer is probably no. We did anyway, whatever. We're 3 and 4. What went wrong? What could we do better? Is this the best roster we can field? And then we think about it, go back, make decisions. We spent 2 weeks on DPS comps involving, Cool Matt. How does Cool Matt interact with playing Sombra? Can Cool Matt play Sombra? Spree's communication in the team, where does that line up? If we play Spree, can we play Cool Matt? We need Dante for this, that, and the other thing. I understand where you're coming from. I just feel like we had so much time to test, so we made a lot more changes than maybe other teams would. I mean, I think that there's an argument I don't know. That's
the argument that we're going to make is like, then we're going to see it. And
that's what I mean. Yeah.
I mean, I think Raucus is playing well in the Yana. I do think, I came into this stage thinking the Houston Outlaws were going to be better, right? And I had, high expectations, and I actually think you exceeded the expectations based on that Titans match. So, and if the argument is that you're practicing goats to move on, then that's fine. And I look forward to seeing the rest of the games. Certainly, I think a lot of these matches are very winnable.
Yeah, I don't think we'll make too many roster changes going forward. But last stage was last stage was weird. Like goats, man. Like it goes back to like the argument. Should you try other things? Should you try this player? Is it worth keeping whoever in? Goats was a very tough hurdle to jump. I think. I think a lot of teams are still struggling to jump over the hurdle, and I think other teams did struggle putting together a roster to jump over the hurdle. I think that some teams maybe I could argue should have experimented more and maybe should have played more musical chairs, in particular. So I think that like it was just like a necessary learning curve for the meta, and I think that like that's just how it had to be. I don't know. I don't think it was like a commitment thing or a strength thing. It was more just like this isn't working, this is working.
Coming out of this specific example, another aspect which you alluded to at the beginning that I do want to address here, because I think it's actually, it's a side issue, but it's key to the whole topic, is like the idea that the broadcast created a narrative. Now, obviously, you didn't know all the stuff we were going to talk about now, so maybe you had a different perspective on that. Maybe you have the same perspective. I don't know. But the notion is the broadcast creates a narrative, and then you get fans hear the narrative. Maybe they don't have great analytical skills. They just take it at face value. I would even suggest they dumb it down even further, and it becomes something simple like just play DPS. Like, does Jake not play Trish yet? Like,
said,
yeah. So okay, and then the idea is it's kind of like you worried about that chain of events, right? So like whether the broadcast team is like responsible with how they create the narrative, or if they push a narrative too far and then it reacts with the fans. One thing I'll just say at the outset, because you can't have a discussion, Flame, and with the context of Twitter and the Outlaws without saying this following statement is, right, there's a reason I call the Outlaws fans the TSM fans of the Overwatch League, mate. And one of the reasons why is not just the idea of like they've got loads of fans and they're all plebs or whatever. No, the reason why is what made the TSM fan base very unique in esports. I don't think I've ever seen this with any other fan base, with the exception of Brazilian fans who are their own entire kettle of fish, and that's an entirely separate topic. What makes the TSM fans unique, right, is that they themselves, the fan base, would so aggressively go after anyone who said it, not even something critical, just like if you said like, Bjergsen was the second best player in the world, you were a fucking piece of shit hater who should be destroyed, a heretic to be burned at the stake. Like, that's the level they were on. And so unfortunately, Flame, even though that's not actually the fault of Bjergsen or TSM, it does lead to its own feedback loop, which is that Just as you, the players, on people in the teams are like, we got him, boys. We finally got him on the narrative. He can't possibly dispute because he doesn't know this info. In the same way as you're like that, analysts have been barraged by so many stupid comments over the weeks, months, that the second they think there's a chance to not only make a good point, but as a nice freebie on the side, fuck up all those annoying fans, they are also going to take that opportunity. So unfortunately, there's a feedback loop on both ends here, mate.
It's true.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's not talking about all the fans. We're talking about the extreme ones, obviously, which I'm sure the ones are large, probably the same Venn diagram, annoying both sets of people.
Yeah, I mean, Overwatch. I don't know. I don't want to like go too deep down the rabbit hole of Overwatch, but Overwatch is like it feels unique. From my perspective, I don't have like a full grasp of CS or League, to be perfectly fair. I think I understand Dota pretty well, from like a caster dynamic and like maybe fan dynamic, but I definitely feel like Overwatch has like this weird unique problem where I don't think, and I don't have data to support this, I don't have like any real metrics, but it feels like more people watch Overwatch than play Overwatch, and yes. I'm gonna throw that out there. And so I feel like the hardcore audience is the only audience. I think that if Overwatch had the player base that like League or, you know, Dota or even like CS had, the viewership wouldn't be around 100, be around like 4 or 5. If people actually played the game and were just interested. And so it creates like this really weird loop in the community where like Reddit, the people on Reddit are it's very much the same people that are on Twitter, and it's very much the same people that are on the stream chats.
I mean, I actually disagree with that, because just in terms of content, the number of hits that's coming from Reddit is very low. And so the majority of the audience, I would actually argue, is not on like the Comp Overwatch subreddit. Like my traffic is like 95% on YouTube, you know, from just YouTube, and from my Twitter. It's like very low from competitive.
Well, maybe it's the feedback loop then. So maybe
here's what I think. I think they're just a bunch of really fucking loud and annoying people at it.
Yeah, I mean, I think like what was weird to me was that people were like, as if people were like implying that I was like mad at Reddit, or like that I think that it's like crazy that the fans are like shit talking us. Like I don't think that's a problem. That's like normal. That's like normal everything. Sure. It's like literally everything. Yeah. So like that was a weird narrative that I didn't really expect to come out of anything that I said. I didn't really care that people were harassing us with playing more DPS or spamming it in our Twitters. But I guess the annoying part was coming from the broadcast, because it felt like the analysis could have been so much more positive or focused on like the actual points in the match where we lost versus the takeaway being, if you had played this comp, you would have won. That I think that was the most annoying part. I don't want to like speak to everyone's mentalities.
Like I said, I was sort of in the middle of really understanding like what was like all of the other stuff that was happening simultaneously to that. I can say that my focus of my commentary was broadly that teams need to find a style and like commit to that, because I don't think that you're going to beat Vancouver Titans in a 3-3 mirror, which is still my opinion. And
yeah. And also adding on to that, Flame, is someone that's sort of made the transition now from like someone that's seen.
You made the reverse transition.
The reverse transition. Yeah, the teams like they see like I've been in the dugouts and I've been in teams like not only previous with the Overwatch League, obviously, even I didn't, you know, I was in my own situation, but like I see how teams respond to analyst commentary, including myself when I'm on said team. And then now I've made the swap onto a more broadcast role, obviously, or a purely broadcast role. And I see now it's like one of those things where it's easier said than done, because sometimes like you want the analysts or the casters or whatever to focus on this narrative, right? You want them to talk about this is what they did great. But sometimes your point that you're trying to make on broadcast, or the analysts are trying to make on broadcast, it is sort of that same point, but worded in the context of, well, if they had played this, if they had like made these swaps, if they had made these adjustments mid-match, rather than they did this great, but here's where they failed. Like it's sort of the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's an Overwatch thing. Because like I've fallen into the trap too. I think like in general, there's like the trap that you can fall into as an analyst in Overwatch specifically of you can talk about their comp or you can talk about their play. And I felt like this was one of the I mean, it doesn't matter. It's like Monty's opinion, right?
By the way, that's also a very
opinion,
famous thing from other games that fans, again, because remember, the most casual fan is going to reduce everything to the most simple comment because that's what he's going to understand. So, for example, they will always go with that flame of like, if you'd have played this character differently, would it have gone different? Because that's the ultimate way to give possibility. They can't really analyze what you fucked up with the execution always, you know, like... That's just the lowest common denominator.
Yeah, for sure. I think, well, when you go into the match and Monty's casting it, and this is just an Outlaws perspective, you expect to get shit on at the end of the match. And we felt...
Win some more games, like make it impossible. Win some more games, mate.
I mean, whenever we win a game, it's because someone was sick, someone had a life-threatening injury. Point being, if someone didn't play well, someone else didn't play well.
There's a lot of repressed stuff coming out here. It's like a therapist couch for you.
My point is, you go into the matches expecting the terrible like storyline, and I feel like
the backhanded compliment. Yeah.
So maybe this was the real tipping point from the Outlaws' perspective. Not
basically the Outlaws just wants Monty to, for once, bring them in for a big hug and say they did a good job and stop giving them those backhanded compliments.
Well, I think the end of the match, everyone kind of expected the like Outlaws played well, you know, or like Outlaws could have won this, but instead we got barraged, and like I don't think it's Monty's fault.
Outlaws could have won.
No, yeah, I don't think it was Monty's fault, but I think that like the emotional reaction that came from me in particular, and from Jake, and from multiple players on our team, it wasn't the rest of the team didn't tweet. The rest of the team had its own. I mean, we have like our internal discussions. We have our own. We're all in person sometimes.
Yeah, sure.
I think that the general consensus from like my perspective, from Jake's perspective, was, holy shit, we made this match look close. We did a lot better than we thought we would have. Realistically, we played out of our minds comparatively to what we expected. Going to that match, me and Tyrone were not super confident, but watching them perform on stage significantly better than they had in scrims was nice. And then suddenly, at the end of the match, it's just like, fuck you, play GPS comps. Why was Arhan in? His tracer was good. Why'd you make him play Brig? And like, I think it went back to the desk saying it too many times, and then it like triggered me. It triggered Jake. It got us like super emotional.
There's also no way to know how fans reacted, even if we didn't say any of that stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
I feel like they would have said it anyway.
We've entered a specific dynamic here of Houston and public relations.
Yeah, I mean, there's a very different
dynamic.
Yeah. I mean, there's a
Monty and the desk don't control this dynamic. It's a Houston-specific problem. It's, I mean,
our Twitters are so. Generally speaking, I would say even when we lose, I've never seen that level of.
I'm not referring to your losing tweets though. I'm just referring.
No, I mean in general. That was like the most vitriolic post match I think we've ever had, from a social media perspective, ever. It was insane. Like it was definitely a statistical outlier in that sense. I don't know why.
It's almost like your fans are delusional and think you should beat the Vancouver Titans, mate. You remember that thing I said about the TSM fans? Anyway, just don't touch that one. Just leave that one for a second. Let's keep going. It's whatever. Exactly. We're only talking about the worst ones anyway. We're not talking about one.
All I'm learning right now is that I have epic powers to cause the Houston Outlaws to tilt off the face of the planet through my commentary.
Actually, you know what, Monty? Along those lines, Monty's nailed it, by the way, because I won't say who it was, but someone in the community actually messaged me when all this was going down and said that what they didn't like was the implication that like casters and analysts like control the fans. And I was like, well, what I would do there is what you do basically if you're ever out in the dating scene and a young lady happens to talk to you and she gives you what's called a shit test, which is where she'll say something like, you know, I bet you say that to all the girls or whatever. The rule that they always say is what you do is you agree and amplify to absurdity, because that's how you make it funny and you break the tension, right? So what you do is if she says you say that to all the girls, you go, yeah, you're the 21st one I tried it on tonight. Did it work? You know, you do something stupid like that. They were like, obviously you haven't really done that though. So I said the same thing to the person when they said like that. They were saying that. I said, if I were Monty, I'd just own it. I'd say, you know what? I've made you lose all those fucking games in stage 1. If you fuck with me in stage 2, I'll wreck you completely and I'll have your entire fan base destroy you. So, you know, let's come to the negotiating table, Outlaws. Let's be reasonable here, because he doesn't have that much power. Come on. Monty wishes he had that much power. He wishes he had that much power.
No, so I actually don't think that I think that like Monty was just like a catalyst, but I don't think that I think it initiated from the desk. I think the desk like started this chain a little bit, and then Monty like brought it home, and then like this whole time we're just like
So obviously,
it's like really you're gonna like. I understand it was stupid at the time. Like I understand nobody should have tweeted. Like if you go back in time, nobody should have tweeted. My Twitter should have been taken. My phone should have been thrown out the window of the car on the way home. We just got new ones actually from T-Mobile. Like thank you T-Mobile.
Flem, like you and I are friends, and you could always message me stuff.
Oh yeah, I know. It was more. I think I was more just like. It was just crazy to me, and it felt so bad from like the team perspective that like people were shitting on Tyrong. As if like we made some strategical. I never said anything. No, I know, but it went from if they're not playing this, it's the coach's fault, and like that was like the natural line of thought. It was like, well, if Dante's on Sombra, it's probably Tyrong's call. Let's kill him for making them play not DPS comps, and like.
But first off, like that's impossible because the coaches literally couldn't talk to the players in the maps to tell them to like switch.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not. So I don't. Yeah, I know. Anyway, my point was more just
the
like
whole thing. The whole thing was
robbed.
silly, and I do think that it did spiral out of control, but like. You have to understand, like, I would have changed my commentary had I known during the cast what the fuck was going on, right? Because, like, I do agree that I was the catalyst for this, but it's not like we came into that day. Because, we have meetings where we talk about how we're
for sure.
match and which storylines are we going to run with and, like, which stats do we want. We have these meetings every day.
I mean, I spoke to Zoe, I think, before the match started, and she was like, if you guys get stomped, I have a haiku ready for halftime. Like, I'm gonna just change it into a joke. She was like, I wrote a poem for the Outlaws if they're getting shit on so that we don't have to talk about the match. We can just go to this poem that I wrote, and it'll distract the audience. So, I mean, I understand that dynamic.
What happened was, this is like the whole weird, like, scenario. Because you guys were doing better, we had to switch stuff. Like, you guys were performing much better than expected. So then it turned into, for me, like, okay, so we're seeing them run. They just played super well. Now we're seeing them do this stuff that, they're getting rolled on Paris. And then they have the strong defense with the Sombra goats. And then it turns into sort of a broader question about style when you have this really big dichotomy that's developed in this match and it has evolved in a way you didn't. And then I think what happened was the stuff that I said was then taken by other people because I think it was an interesting storyline to run with. I'm not saying they were in the wrong for doing this.
No, for sure.
But it got amplified because it was interesting. Like the match was very interesting to watch. And so then it got amplified and then it just got like mega amplified by social media. So like it turned into this like massive shit hurricane.
Oh, it was a massive shit hurricane. I mean, you're not wrong. It was just like, it was just so weird. I mean, if you look back on that day, it was really bizarre. Everything was weird. I think like that was one of the few times where like everyone was I was amped up after the match. Like I felt good about the match. Like I was happy with the way that we lost, I guess. And then instead of, I understand in retrospect, also, like being emotional on Twitter is never.
I also think that like, I disagree with what Bren said to you on Twitter.
Well, yeah, that just triggered me even more because then it's like this. It's like I'm going. Then I went on the Avast channel. I was like, did this ass clown just literally tell me?
Well, that was the death knell.
Twitter. That was. I know, but I'm saying I know. But I'm saying like that was like the tipping point. Like like my LOL at Monty was like that was like a. I don't want to say it was banter, but it was like okay. It wasn't. Nobody was gonna freak out about that.
Also, I have a good relationship with you, so like
I knew you. I mean, the last time we went out to drink, you apologized to me. So like that just shows where our friendship is.
Must have had a lot to drink.
So my point being that like I knew that you weren't gonna care if I LOL'd you, and then I wanted the discussion to go more in depth there. But then Bren tweets at me something about being a Redditor, and I was like, what in God's name? This guy poses in
the
Genji
ultimate,
outfits.
The gravest insult.
Yeah, it was like this guy, it's like the worst insult you can throw at somebody. When this guy's like posting half his content in a Genji outfit, it's like, God help me.
Well, I mean, I guess the point is, maybe just don't get mad at Bryn and like don't just don't like it. I mean, like at the end of the day, I think what the people were bringing up on stream was the reaction.
We're not saying that things shouldn't have happened.
And then Jake came in.
People don't understand like how it got to this point.
Yeah, I don't think so either. And then, but then Jake started losing his shit too, and I was like, do I tell him this? Like Jake's just going in. Like
you were like, well, in for a penny, in for a pound.
Yeah, I think next time you tag out, you bring Jake onto my stream. You tag out and you bring him in, and then I do the same thing.
Jake will not do that. Jake will not. Jake knows better.
But by the way,
I like just don't do it.
Just as a quick aside, because I didn't forget this, so I have to bring this up again. Because you said this, and I didn't let anyone react because we were just setting the show up. Right? When you said that comment, like, what would have happened if you'd have won? Would then everyone be saying about how great the Outlaws' goats is? Like, Avast, you're the neutral observer. I'm going to give you the deciding judgment on this one, right? Was that delusional? Like, was that like me saying, like, oh, but what if I had have just been fucking amazing at this horse? Maybe everyone would say I had the best knowledge in Overwatch. Like, was he taking that one too far? Was it reasonable that they could have won and therefore... Because basically what he's implying by that, by the way, is like, you know, a very small difference could have totally changed how the desk maybe would have presented it. What do you think on that one? What's your judgment on that? You can have this one.
Ooh. All right, well, this is a tough one for me because as someone that's, as I said, seen both sides, I will agree that at times it has seemed the broadcast, there's been an interesting dynamic between the broadcast and the Houston Outlaws at times. Okay. I won't say that's like the norm. I don't say it's intended at all because no one in the broadcast team is ever looking to tear down players or is ever looking to tear down teams.
It's just a bonus.
They're really just not trying to. Like, they're really none of them. I don't think that.
Nobody as a caster walks in and is like, you know what I want to do today?
Yeah.
I'm going to fucking lay into this 18-year-old and make him feel like shit. Sometimes you have to, but it's not like something that nobody's there delighting in that or thinking that that's how they want to start their cast.
And also, it's not their intention. And when they're wording things, the intention is not to be mean. It's just like, this is their opinion, right? And so, but it definitely is a weird dynamic between, I would say, like a lot of times what Flem said was when Houston suddenly wins game, it's because the other team was playing suddenly it's because the other team played badly or the other team just wasn't performing at their best. Now, that doesn't mean that isn't true. That doesn't mean that the other team didn't, in fact, play badly. And that is why Houston won. It just means that it gets brought up, you know, sometimes, especially last season.
Disproportionately. Sure.
Now, and that is not, and I think that's just like a weird dynamic once again between, we're just talking with the essentially monolith of Houston fan base that is Houston and how much social media impact it has and how things get blown out of proportion. But I think the desk would, in my opinion, I know Bryn and Josh, aside from Bryn obviously, would have made concessions and said, wow, Houston did good. Because I don't think they're mean-spirited. I think they would have, they're professionals. They would have said like, wow, Houston did this good if the game had been closer. I feel like I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, and they would have done that. Yeah.
Do you want to talk about some other teams briefly?
I will just say, by the way, as a closing point, Flame, on the angle that you said before about like this aspect of like, even when you came close to winning the game or it wasn't as bad as people thought, you know, you still felt like people took like a critical or unduly negative angle on it. I will say one thing just to throw in as someone who does analysis in other games is part of the problem of watching a game that fans will never understand is you aren't watching the game like you're chilling on a sofa going, oh, okay, Braden, if your eyes see anything good, we'll wake up and think about it. The whole time you're analysing the game. So it's like you're trying to do a live VOD review in a VOD you can't rewind. So half of what you do, I at least find, and I notice a lot of analysts tend to do this approach as well, is you go into the game looking for a few specific things, you keep a track of those in the game, and then that really is the thread of how you're going to analyse the game. So for example, there will be times where I get the same criticism, like, you're always negative about this team, you know, look how close they were. And it's like, yeah, but actually, if you listen to how I set the game up in the pre-game, I said that for them to win, they had to do these few things. They didn't win, and in fact, they specifically didn't do some of those things, so I'm going to have to harp on that because that was the only way I actually thought they were going to win the game, even though they might have done something different in the game unexpectedly that worked better than I would have thought, but that wasn't really ultimately, with the way I've set the analysis up, the most defining factor. Now, you can definitely disagree. As a person who's playing in the team, you could say, well, you should have just gone with that aspect of it, but that is like a method of analysis, I will say. So unfortunately, that is always going to look biased when it comes out in that very particular like outcome in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it in a vacuum too, it's actually not surprising that it was me and Jake that busted, right? because we've both done analytical work for Overwatch on multiple occasions. So like, I mean, if you go back and you like analyze the situation from an outside, it makes like, looking back, it makes sense that it was me and Jake that broke and like understood. We're like the ones that were like, how are you looking?
You thought it was malicious, right?
Yeah, because it was like in our eyes, we were like, how do you look at this match and come up with that conclusion? And like that was kind of I guess that was my take, and that was probably Jake's take. Is like we worked so hard, we played really well, and the best thing people could say is get on DPS comp, as if like our goats didn't look good.
Yeah, I will say Monty was a bit unfair that he didn't at least say, look, considering they were running entirely the wrong comp and they practice like idiots and they don't even have an identity, they did do pretty fucking well actually. Like, you know, they were way better than I thought they should be for an obviously terribly constructed and coached team. So, you know, he could have at least given you that, for fuck's sake, Flem. Come on, throw him a bone.
Yeah, it was just the like the balance of like how we felt versus what fans were saying was like so opposite that it was just like, it was crazy. Maybe that was the first time we've experienced it like that. I don't know.
Welcome to what it's like for everyone else
weird.
to interact with the
Houston
Outlaw fans.
Yeah, it was really weird. I don't know. That was really weird. I've never. It hasn't happened yet, and it's been a year and a half. I don't think I've ever felt that way before. Like I don't think I've ever experienced that. It was weird.
I think that means you're probably getting fans that are more passionate about the game, because previously your fans were there because you were like a K-pop group or something, and your in-game actual performance didn't really affect you.
I'd say more like Backstreet Boys or something. You know, no, maybe not in them. Maybe what was the oldest? What was the one before that called? The one from the 90s. New Kids on the Block. There we go. New Kids on the Block. That's what I'm going for.
There you go.
But I mean, going back, it was obviously everything was a mistake.
Right. Here's the thing.
I'm not sure, because I think we got.
That's the title, by the way. Going back, everything was a mistake.
Going back, everything was a mistake.
That's the title.
I hope you reflect upon your stream appearance for me and realize that you have to condense your points, Flame. Like, you just have to. You just have to fucking condense your points.
Yeah, to be fair, Flame, you also say that like, you say like I shouldn't have tweeted. You tweeted some more, then got home and thought, let me get on a fucking stream and start going like to the next one.
When we talk about this too, the crossover from Reddit to Twitter, all of my stream viewers that are in my chat, because I've somehow magically, while being the moray eel that I am, you know, the one that's suckling upon the stream, the more, whatever it is, whatever. I'm not a biologist, I don't know. But like the stream has exploded to now I have like 2,000 viewers every stream, like Sideshow did. And these are all competitive Overwatch Reddit users, like all of them for the most part. And so when you hop on there and you're like, and then you go into a 45-minute rant where you're sending me into my bed to sleep with this 45-minute rant. Like, it is not going to, it's just,
I know. Like, I wasn't, so like the thing too, I think that I've learned, and this is probably thanks to Monty and Duncan in particular over the past 2 years, is like, when you read Reddit, you just don't. Like, you can just like choose to not care about Reddit. And I think that like last year I cared a lot. I think this year it's like, okay, Reddit's shit talking me for this whole conversation I was having on that stream. I'm like, whatever, it sucks. It brought out a lot of good talking points,
exactly.
I think. Regardless of how it went down, it was not the most elegant way of it going down. But realistically, I think last year I would have been a little bit more emotionally broken by the amount of like, I don't know what the word, vitriol in my Twitter DMs. Or in my just like Reddit mentions, like some guy told me to resign, bitch. Someone else told me, where is it? There's just a lot. My DMs are coming. My point is they come in like that, and you're like, I just laugh now.
Flame reads mean tweets.
Yeah. but my point is that like they come in like that, and I'm just like laughing. But yes, I mean it's like you just learn from it. But I didn't really care that I know that there's a massive overlap, because the people that are in Avast stream are very similar to the ones that were in my stream, like pre Overwatch League, and like the ones that, you know, are posting on Reddit and going into Twitch chats and memeing and stuff. And it's a pretty tight knit community too. So it's like you just kind of deal with it. But
it's also that, I mean, I don't think that it's bad that. I think you do have some really good points, and I don't think it, you know, now that we can have a conversation about why you were frustrated, this is something that, you know, we will consider obviously when we're casting the Outlaws, and just in general, I think with the casting in the Overwatch League, I don't think that you're wrong necessarily on many of these things, and I think that we could have handled it better. So it has been productive, right? So I don't really think of this as like disaster.
No, for sure. Yeah, that's what I mean. It was like.
I think it's really interesting.
And by the way, just so it can be stated once and for all, I'm pretty sure this goes for Monty as well, but I don't particularly like dislike anyone personally on the Outlaws. I don't even dislike them as much as players. Like, they're generally pretty good players. A couple of players I think are a bit overrated, but whatever. We'll leave that to one side. But then again, I don't necessarily dislike tomatoes, but if someone annoyed me, I would throw one in their face. You see the principle there? So if people are annoying me, I might use the fact that Jace can't play Tracer just to fuck with that person, but that doesn't mean I actually dislike Jake. You see the distinction there?
I mean, I wouldn't mind like a cage match with Bren, but
okay, there we go.
That's like a different time.
Dressed as a Japanese schoolgirl. Yes, there we go. There we go.
Whatever he pleases. He could be Genji in a Japanese schoolgirl. Like, live his life.
The gravest insult, calling you.
Right, here's the only thing though. Avast did mention earlier that he has to go soon. So what I would suggest is this. First of all, let's be real. Anyone who gets to the end of this episode, like, all they talked about was that drama, and that was the only thing we were obsessed about, not talking about the games. It's like, shut the fuck up. You know why you were here till the end. Don't deny your guilty pleasure. Secondly, that could also be a good title. Secondly, we don't have that much time. So how about this? Avast, I'll give you the dealer's choice. What team should we talk about?
What team should we talk about?
Because God knows I don't want to talk about the Houston Outlaws anymore.
No more Houston.
Or the Titans.
Yes.
I agree. I don't want to talk about the Houston or Titans anymore.
So pick one that's interesting to you.
I think the team that is most interesting to me right now is the Charge. Like honestly, why? Because they looked like they looked okay. They looked pretty solid last stage. They looked like they managed to pick a roster from various players that people didn't necessarily overrate last season. Like we talked about Hotba, like people thought Hotba was good, but they didn't think he was that great last season.
It should have been better.
People thought Happy was a prodigy though, and then like you add in Kib, who into this weird mixed roster who's now in there, and then obviously Nero, who's on their Contenders team in China. So, and they looked pretty solid. In fact, I would have rated Shu and Rio as two of the best players, like potentially top 5 in the role.
I mean, we were talking about Shu as potentially like rookie of the year.
That's Shu and Rio are fantastic. And then we get to stage 2, and obviously, and this is just a meme on my own stream, but I've moved them into Papega tier now. I moved them into like the bottom tier of play because it's one thing if we don't expect them to win maps against top tier teams, or to win games, I should say, against like top tier teams like New York, Shock, Titans, right? You don't expect them to win. But you do expect a team that looked relatively solid to take a map, or at any point. Just
they're currently on a 24 map loss
streak.
If they go 0-2 against Spark next week, they break Shanghai's record.
And I can't figure out a single, and it's tough for me to pinpoint the reasons other than players, because players frequent my stream too, and players just come in just like mental boom. Like mental boom. That's all they say. It's just mental boom.
So part of this, now we do have to acknowledge, part of this has been like they played the Titans, Gladiators twice, and Shock twice.
But you would expect them to take a map, at least a single map at any point in there.
Sure, I agree with that, right? But I'm just saying that because of their ridiculous strength of schedule, like the Paris one is really the big question mark to me. Yeah. The other ones you expect them to lose, and they could just be on a statistical outlier because, for example, in their last match against Gladiators, the first map was really close and they barely lost it. They barely lost Lijiang. I was casting that badge, and that was very winnable for them. And it's like, unfortunately, it's just there is a very small statistical likelihood that they just have come out on the wrong side, just barely a bunch of these maps that they could have won, which has contributed to this immense map loss streak that they have right now. But the Paris one is really what fucks up the analysis.
It's a huge outlier. If they hadn't lost to Paris, I would have them higher.
Even Gladiators, like I don't want to bash Gladiators at all because I think that they're playing phenomenally. But they did the match yesterday was close. I'm not gonna say Valiant is like a bad team. I think that they're playing a lot better currently. But I feel like if Valiant can take maps off of Gladiators and make it a close series, like there shouldn't be an argument that Guangzhou can do the same. And so, I mean, like you can talk about it however you want, but Mental Boom is like such a simplified version of like internal turmoil.
Of course.
And I think that Mental Boom's a thing, and that's where like on stage you freak, I think, and you have like you break, I don't know, something happens and you can't play anymore and like you forget how to win. But I feel like they're at a point where like they must be going into matches either demoralized, without a winning mentality, or like some form of internal problem that is so large that it's like causing 23 maps is a lot.
Saying mental boom in that context is like saying the patient died. Why? Death. It's like, well, what's the reason though? You know, it's too applied. And I agree.
It's because the Charge are just so inscrutable on this, and I agree with Avast that it doesn't make sense that their synergy has decreased to this point in time when we're seeing a very similar meta, and even a meta that should favor them, especially because they were running more 3 DPS than any team that wasn't Chengdu. Like, I think the league average last stage was 2.8% of the time teams ran 3 DPS, and I think, this is off the top of my head, Guangzhou was running it over 16% of the time, so significantly. And this is you would have thought that this meta, at least on some of the control maps, and some of the assault maps would play into their strengths with these DPS looks and Hotba's flexibility. So if anything, you'd expect the Charge to do better, especially when you consider that they went 3-4 last stage, and 2 or 3 of their 4 losses were twice against the Titans and once against Chengdu, I believe, where they barely lost.
They had that one.
And they took Titans to map 5.
They took Titans to map 5 once, and then they got dumpstered by them the second time, 4-0. And the other map they lost was to the Gladiators after the Gladiators started being good. So, you look at their losses last stage and you're like, oh, that it's understandable why they would have lost these matches. Those were hard games, et cetera, et cetera. They got surprised by Chengdu because they were the first. Yeah, they were
literally the first.
Chengdu.
Yeah,
so
first
they didn't know what to expect. They got thrown off for sure. But yeah, it's so bizarre that this would be happening to this.
How would you like to hear the team comms for that first game? I bet that would be fucking amazing. Come on, it's enough times past, Blizzard. Give us those comms.
It was probably pretty similar to Vancouver's against us with the Torbjorn. Like, you're just like, what is going on? And you're like, how do I beat this? What is happening? This isn't Overwatch. I mean, they're so good. Like, individually, they're so good. Like, you could make an argument that they have top tier caliber players on their team. Like, that's what makes this really weird, because it's not like Washington struggling. They have it's not like Mayhem struggling. Like, Happy, like Rio,
Shu,
Hotba, Shu, like these are
they're
all
so
you could make arguments that they're like top. I don't know. I don't want to say 5, but like maybe like top 10, top 8 in their roles.
I think you could for top 5 for Shu and Rio. I think you could.
Yeah, as individuals, and so it's wild. Like there's no other way to put it. It's like crazy. It's like where's the actual problem here? Like, I don't even know.
Really
it's like the weird.
It's really mind-boggling. It's like really weird. It's like Charges just picked this. I don't know how to put it. They've like put themselves in a situation where you can't blame players. I don't think you can blame coaching for a 23 map loss. I mean, maybe you can, but like,
I think that's the one thing you can point to, if anything, right?
23 maps is a lot. That's like on stage problems too. It's like stage fright mixed with like. I don't know. You could have players coaching themselves and you would win Koth maps, I think. Like. It's weird.
Maybe Huangju, maybe they're just practicing to be the best team at the end of the year, though. They're not just trying to win every single game.
That's true. But also, coaching encompasses more than just strategy.
That was not an entirely serious point. I hope everyone realizes.
You could blame coaching
like
for morale.
your mental health as well.
Your
morale, your leadership. Like, coaching is an all-around aspect. So, and it's important to have coaches that are well-rounded in that respect.
Well, this is going to be the critical week for the Charge too, because they're playing the Spark and the Rain, which these are both theoretically highly winnable matches for them.
Extremely winnable with Rain as well. Extremely winnable, because Rain has not looked very good. So there's just no reason for that to happen. It's just weird, and so you can only point to internal issues, right? It's just like a Rain scenario. Though granted, you can also say with Rain they're missing Dako, they're missing Defran, obviously.
I mean, I don't think Defran was a major contributor to that team's success. I think Dako is the glaring void, right?
I think Defran you can at least point to, because they picked up Baby, who is just worse Defran. Like, you pick up Baby, who's he does the same things Defran does, but not as good. So I would say that
Defran Zarya was, I would say, top.
Defran Zarya, despite him literally being the definition of all aim no brain at times, his aim was so insane that it didn't matter that if he just threw away grabs.
He was up there with Sinatra for damage per.
Like, it was crazy how much he did at times.
No, he wasn't. Like, I can just tell you, like, Defran's statistics, because we looked into it. The vast majority of damage on that team was coming from Pokpo and Erster, who were, like, #1 for a while on 9 and Brigitte in terms of overall damage. Actually, Defran's damage numbers were very low. He just had a lot of final blows. He was cleaning up kills that, like, Erster and Pokpo and Dako were, like, doing most of the damage.
Well, the point is that Defran, when we talk about the concept of Defran, it's more of they have a replacement Defran that plays pretty much the exact same style that's not as good at the style. Is the concept, is what I'm putting out there. It's like, I think Baby plays a very similar style to Defran. So he's frozen.
Is he?
Yes,
yeah.
I
thought he was in thought there. He does sometimes
it's a very
do that.
deep thought, but he's definitely.
He's gone
deep.
There you go. Yeah, we didn't hear what you said.
You froze.
Yeah.
We didn't hear what you said. You
Say it again.
No, I said I'm curious now. I'm going to go back and take a look at the Defran versus Baby Bay damage numbers just to try and dig into this a little bit more, because I have a feeling that Baby Bay is doing more damage, but that's also in the absence of Pokpo and Erster and Dako.
And yeah.
So
I mean, I can agree that much, but still, it's like the whole point is, I think that's a winnable game for Rain at least. Spark may be on the rise, but Rain looks to be in a position. But granted, I think Dako has been supposedly coming back right in this next week. So we'll see.
The org that says nothing has said nothing.
We'll
so,
by the way, just if anyone's watched this episode and they haven't quite had their fill of drama, they want some dessert after the show, just go to Monty's Twitter, right, and find the tweet he did, which is a fairly harmless joke using the metaphor of like, you know, a missing kid on the back of like a milk carton or something. Like, has anyone seen this? You know, and you should just go and look. You'll know who it is when you see it. I'm not going to say the name of the person, but like the absolutely unreasonable fan wig out over this one harmless joke goes, and by the way, it goes so deep you're not even going to believe how far this guy goes with it. But like,
he basically drills through the entire, like, that's how deep it goes.
But it's just worth it if you just want, like, this is one everyone can enjoy. You're not even going to get invested. There's no sides on this one.
The situation ends positively.
Well, we'll have to see on that one. Also, I do have to go now. I have to drive up to go cast. So, but thank you for having me on. The Monty.
Yeah, well,
you guys have a good day.